Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Soboroff, Decker, Bonner, Figueroa, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. We have consent agenda items today, A, B, C, D, E, and F. Do we have any commissioner comments or questions on any of those? Okay. We're just on consent agenda items now. Yeah, we'll check. Yeah, good point. We'll check, okay? It's funny. Can we check and see what the weight line is there?
No, for 2B. He must have an order.
Mr. T?
Oh, it's okay. That's okay. Excuse me.
Representatives of the family or the attorney for the family in the closed session item is here today, and I would like to give them an opportunity to speak if they'd like to. So that we're going basically what we're going to do here is open public comment. Is that what you're speaking in public comment?
Yes.
Okay, sir. And then we will then we'll go back to the regular agenda. Sir.
Thank you very much. My name is John Taylor, and I'm the lawyer for Albert Corrado Sr.
Wait, hold on for 1 second.
You got it.
The city attorney recommended to me that this is a public comment on the closed session item, which is OIS 4618.
Correct.
Okay, so this is not general public comments.
Great.
Okay, sorry. We'll start over.
My name is John Taylor, and I'm an attorney representing Albert Corrado. My name is John Taylor. I'm an attorney representing Albert Corrado Sr. and Albert Corrado Jr., the father and brother of Melly Corrado, who was struck and killed by a LAPD bullet at the Trader Joe's on July 21st, 2018. And we know that you're going into closed session today to review the matter. We're hopeful that you assess and address the officer's decision, obviously, to use deadly force, not only knowing the target that they were shooting at, but also assessing the background that they were shooting into. So the family, Mr. Corrado and his son are here today. We look forward to the report, and thank you very much for this.
Thank you, sir. Would your clients would they like to speak?
No, that's okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for the offer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll go back to the consent agenda items. Do we have any commissioner comments on items number 1A through 1F? Do we have any public comments on any consent agenda items this morning?
We have comments on all items, sir.
Okay.
We have
Let's start with A.
2 comment cards on 1A. We have Mr. Herman and Michael Novick.
Okay. And how about the rest?
And the rest, we have 2 on B, 2 on C, 1 on D, 1 on E, 1 on F, and D, E, and F are all Mr. Herman.
Okay. Mr. Novick? Michael Novick? Is he here? Go ahead, sir. This is item number 1A.
Yeah, 1A is yet another travel authority for the chief coming up to attend the Police Executive Research Forum, Police Chiefs and Prosecutors meeting in Washington, D.C. I've been objecting regularly to these travel authorities for the chief. I think that he has plenty of business to attend to here, and that the nature of the bodies that he goes to nationally promote counterinsurgency, militarized policing, and we don't need to waste our taxpayer money on sending him to those conferences. This one is in DC for 2 days. Let him Skype in if he really wants to talk to those people. But something about the Police Executive Research Forum, I think the executive research they engage in is detrimental to the people of this city. And if he's going to a meeting of police chiefs and prosecutors, then he needs to insist that the prosecutors start to prosecute police killings, as the prosecutor in Los Angeles continually refuses to do. If our own prosecutor, DA Jackie Lacey, is going and you do send him, you need to mandate him to insist that she bring charges against the officers who killed Grishario Mack and many of the other officers who have occasionally been found out of policy by this body, such as the people who killed Ezell Ford. And if he doesn't do that, there's no reason to send him to D.C. for that meeting.
Next speaker, please.
Mr. Herman?
I'd like to submit these for the record. One is for Mark P. Smith, Carlos de la Guerra, Dale Bonner for the record, Miss Goldsmith for the record, Eileen Decker for the record, Miss Sandra Figueroa Villa for the Tyrant, Richard Spearmint Rhino, T-Fang, and Mr. Moore for the record, sir. Let that reflect public comments concern regarding prosecutors' meetings. We know that certain prosecutors will only prosecute certain people in Los Angeles. And the chief of police responsibility as he attends these meetings has neglected the authority to manage his police officers when they're engaging with homeless people. As you already know, the interaction between the prosecutors defending or representing the city is malicious and biased misconduct because the chief of police is absent.
Off topic.
How can I be off topic?
Or you just you figured out how to be off topic. So let's go back on topic. We're talking about travel.
I'm talking about May 30th,
we're talking about,
2019, the travel authority for the chief of police.
Okay. Now let's go on topic. Go ahead.
So how the matter of you draft this policy is that the prosecutor, as Little Boozy would say, but I'm not going to say it, nor am I going to take the words and actions of MOU by NWA to state for the record, you're wrong.
We have no other comment cards on 1A.
Motion for, I'll move approval. We have a second? All in favor? Anyone opposed? All comments on 1B.
We have 3 comment cards on 1B now. We
Okay.
have Mr. Herman, Michael Novick, and Wayne.
Okay. Michael Novick, please.
I find it bizarre you keep calling me out of order when Regi a couple of weeks ago offered to let me speak ahead of him. You insisted that he could no longer speak and you chased him out of the meeting. So I don't know why you keep calling me up first when somebody else's card has been
Stop the
submitted
clock.
before
I'll tell
me.
you why I'm calling you up, because it takes too long for the next speaker to come up, and out of the interest of time and respect for everybody here, I'm calling you up. Thank you. Go ahead.
So this is the department's report related to a monetary donation of $10,000 from the LA Police Foundation, which, as you know, is there's a conflict of interest there relating to the president of this commission. It's yet more money piling into the LAPD on top of the budget that they have for their business, but this one in particular is for professional development training, for 62 youth service officers. It doesn't say it in the summary, but it's to get the youth service officers to train the cadets in the cadet program on behalf of the community engagement group. And I think that given the sordid history of the LAPD with the cadets, I think, and given the nature of the LA Police Department, you don't want to be training young people as police cadets when you have not yet reined in the LAPD from carrying out murders in the community that those young cadets are coming from. So I think this is an inappropriate monetary donation. Once again, you should advise the LA Police Foundation to send their money to community service organizations that will provide actual beneficial training to young people for jobs and for peacemaking in their own community, not by training them up to be police officers.
Herman? Just for the record, Herman, what you gave to be distributed, on my copy you put a swastika, a Nazi swastika next to my name.
Yes, I did. For the
And
record,
also
I
you
put
wrote-
a red Nazi
also you
sticker.
wrote
Yes.
bury the nigga on my copy.
US 395-544,
Okay,
1969,
turn on the clock.
Brandenburg versus
I
Ohio.
find this stuff to be
Brandenburg
disgusting.
versus Ohio.
Go ahead.
So, relative to the $10,000, relative from the Los Angeles Police Foundation, otherwise known as Cadet Youth Service Officer, as I may introduce a clarification cadet program, as the word true connection, well, the true connection is police officers shouldn't sleep with cadets and have barbecues. Because curriculum is not based on who you have sex with, but it's for the benefit of the community to understand that you don't fuck young children.
Yes, sir. Still fucking kids, huh? And 1B, $10,000 more for child pedophilia. $10,000 more to buy tents and go on field trips with children with adults. What a good fucking idea that is, isn't it? That's about as good of an idea as putting a swastika on a card and having the dumb nerve to tell us all about it. Yes, sir. 62 youths are going to be molested. 62 children will learn what sodomy is before
President,
they
he's off
should.
topic.
Off topic,
1B, they're going to wind up like your kids, Steve. They're going to wind up fucking in the ass unless you
Off
deny
topic.
one.
Thank you. Your time's over, please.
We have no other cards on 1B, sir.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let's go to 1C.
1C, we have 4 cards. We have Mr. Herman.
Oh, wait, was there somebody else on one?
No.
Okay.
That was it. We have, on 1C, we have Mr. Herman. We have Michael Novick, Wayne, and Adam Smith.
Okay.
So what is an actual disruption? What does the courts weigh in on an actual disruption? Because all we're talking about is money, monetary donations that subject the public, people here who speak, because $25,000 might eject you from a public meeting regarding the Los Angeles Police Foundation. Licensed clinical social worker. Is that what a policeman is nowadays? A licensed clinical social worker? Because I observed something in the subway the other day, and Michael Moore observed a video I have of an officer with a baton hitting people with the tents out here on First Street. So what is a clinical social worker? I could be a clinical social worker. Sometimes I can think very well and present myself with the operation of what's happening at this period of time based on BPC number 19-0159. Overruled. I'm on topic. See, being creative in your public comment doesn't mean you have to be the best tool to fight the issues on enhancement services regarding reset, beep, reset. Because, again, there is no actual disturbance here. The risk we take here is that the fact that this monetary donation of $25,000 is not spent on licensed clinical social workers, you can ask Boozy, because he said it very frankly. Fuck the police.
Michael Novick, please.
Yeah, this is yet another donation from the LA Police Foundation with its conflicts of interest with the president of the Board of Police Commissioners. This one is for $25,000. That's a total of $35,000 this week alone. This one is to embed a licensed clinical social worker within the reset team. So we've learned in the war in Iraq what it means to embed a journalist in a military unit, and what it means to embed a social worker in a paramilitary unit like this is equally reprehensible. You're using it to cover for the fact that the police are completely the improper tool to use in dealing with people who need social work and need mental health assistance. So I object to this kind of CYA program. I also think that the key word in reset, which is the Central Area Resource Enhancement Services Enforcement Team, is enforcement. The LAPD is a law enforcement agency. It's not a service organization. It's there to enforce the laws. And as a philosopher once said, the law in its majesty forbids the rich and the poor alike from sleeping under bridges. When you're enforcing laws that are based on a system of white supremacy, economic exploitation, gentrification, displacement, and a form of genocide, then anything you do to cover that up and pretty it up and put lipstick on a pig doesn't change the nature of the fact that you're enforcing laws that are by their nature unjust. And the department is involved in that. So adding a licensed clinical social worker, embedding them within a team that's carrying out that paramilitary mission is inappropriate. You should reject the money, again, and tell the Police Foundation to give the money to actual social workers who will serve people's needs without law enforcement involved.
Wayne?
Such a great idea. Yeah, we used to do this. This is good old school policing. You put a licensed clinical social worker within the group. Now, you have the target of the investigation. Eileen Decker knows the term. So you can't get them on legal warrants, you can't get them on pass warrants, you can't get them on crime probable cause or reasonable suspicion. What you do is that you fake a clinical attack. So that's the next step. So you get undercovers, you agitate the target, videotape them, and then the licensed clinical social worker within the team determines that the person is 5150 on the spot. And then you take them for a 72-hour mental hold. No probable cause needed. No crime needs to be committed. All you have to do is observe the person in an unlawful mental state, and you exercise 5150. Then you drug them. Then you commit them for 30 days to a state mental hospital. This is great policing. It comes right out of East Germany, the Stasi. It's such a good idea. Heil Hitler to you too. Yes, sir. That's exactly how Stevie likes to police, just like little Adolf. Except now we can't find a crime, so we'll find a mental condition to exercise our fucking police power under mental health. That's the latest stunt. You did it to a man called George Bazzetti. You took him for a year. They have something on Hill and Broadway called the mental court. So they adjourn your criminal proceedings and stick you in mental court as long as they fucking want. Yes, what a good idea. If you vote for this, I have one thing to say to you. You support Hitler.
Adam Smith?
Good morning. I just thought when we're talking about specifically the reset team, it's worth bringing up that they are the continuation of the Safer City initiative in Skid Row was a ramp up of LAPD force in Skid Row to specifically target homeless people. We know that the LAPD is one of their goals is to, be the social workers across the city, to take over this idea that it's normal for police to be the first responders in mental health crises. And, the thing about these donations is you click on the link and it never actually says what the money's for. It says it's used to allow for LCSW to be embedded, but what's the money actually being used for? It's being given to the police department. It's not being given to some city department that works on mental health. And what the hell does 25 grand do toward a year program? If you're talking about, to me it says that you're paying a social worker to be out there with the police, but what is 25 grand going to do in a year? Because I know that an actual licensed clinical social worker goes to school for 6 to 8 years. So I'm just wondering what 25 grand does, and I don't know if you all know, but you don't.
Any other speakers on this
We
item?
have no other speakers on this item,
We have
sir.
a motion for approval of item number 1C. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 1D.
1D, we have 2 cards. We have Mr. Herman and Wayne. And for 1E, we have Mr. Herman and Wayne. And 1F, Mr. Herman and Wayne.
Okay, so we're on D, right?
Yes.
So, board action. It says here that they were to report the transmit to the city clerk manager. And it says board action, and there's no response. It just says recommendations. So back on June 5th, which was a few days ago, relative to the request for authority to destroy obsolete records. Get it? Obsolete records. Why would you want to destroy obsolete records? Nothing is obsolete. Everything has to come back to a real issue. That because we destroy original records, we cannot come to the realization that Valley Traffic Division was racial profiling Latinos and African Americans in their traffic division department. Right? Isn't it usually the case when we have officers who go out there and portray themselves as good officers, but they happen to attack, I use the word attack, innocent bystanders because their car looks run down and the traffic officer
Mr.
cites
President,
them.
he's off topic. This is about
I'm
destruction of
talking
records.
about traffic
Off
division,
topic,
Mr. T-Fang. Can you,
Herman.
Mr. Silva, can you please redirect me into what you want me to say? Can you course me as to what you want me to actually say?
No.
So am I actually an actual disruption? What is your call on this, Mr. Sobrov?
Well, you're off topic, and so...
But I'm reading right off.
Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Wayne.
Sir? The gentleman right in the middle here, sir? During public comment, you can speak. What you can't do is disrupt the meeting. Stop disrupting the meeting. Okay, this is your last warning. Put your hand down. Yeah, I'm talking to you now. You're disrupting the meeting. No, because you're disrupting the meeting. Okay, last warning. Mr. What's your name? Spindler? Mr. Spindler.
I'm a faggot. Okay.
Do you want to get on topic, Spindler?
Valley Traffic Division. What they do is they pull you over, Miss Decker, for all of this stupid fucking shit. For example,
Mr. President, the speaker's
Yeah.
off topic.
That
It's
was
about
your last
destruction of
off
records.
topic. Next speaker. Next speaker.
We have no other speaker on this item, sir.
Okay, I'll move approval. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 1E, please.
1E is Mr. Herman and Wayne, please.
another traffic division, sir? Mr. Sobroff? Is this another traffic division?
Item number 1E, yeah.
1E? 1E. So this happened back on June 5th of 2019, Mr. Sobroff? Under BPC number 190161 for the record. I'd like to add something to the record. How we create an unacceptable risk of the suppression of ideas. What am I quoting? Well, the state of Maryland versus Joseph H. Munson, Colorado 467 U.S.
Mr. President, the
947
speaker's off topic.
965
This is
and
about
13
discussion of records.
1984. So we know that Central Traffic Division is not hopeless and pathetic, but I do know of a particular individual in the commission who's pathetic and hopeless because he doesn't allow us, the public, to have interaction on our part of recommendations. Am I on
President, the
topic?
speaker's off
Off topic, next speaker.
The next speaker is Wayne.
No, you don't.
Mr.
You can
Sobroff,
come-
now
can
you
come
took away
back
my
after.
time after 49 seconds.
Mr. Herman, this is your last warning to leave the podium.
Why do you have to threat people? Why do you always have to retaliate?
Next speaker.
It's red, so you want to eat Central Traffic Division. This is illegal. The state Supreme Court ruled in non-unnamed niggers versus the city of Los Angeles, U.S. Supreme Court 2019, that you can't destroy the traffic division records until 5 years. You have to have a minimum amount of time until you destroy obsolete original records, which are now not obsolete, but rather the opposite of obsolete, which is what? What is the opposite of obsolete records? They're just records, fool. They just records. They ain't obsolete records. They just original records, and you're destroying original evidence to cover up your crime. And what is you doing? You're profiling black folks like myself that drive in the Central Traffic Division. And I called Miss Decker to let her know that last Monday I was pulled over and profiled for being black.
Mr. President, the
And
speaker's off
that's
topic.
why
Off topic, Spindler.
I just telling you an example of an illegal traffic division stop with
Mr.
this
President, the
original
speaker's still off
record.
topic.
Speaker. Do we have any other speakers?
We have no other speaker on this item, sir. We have no other speaker on this item, sir.
Motion for approval?
So moved.
Sir, please. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to number 1F.
1F, we have 3 cards. We have Mr. Herman, Wayne, and Lucas Martin.
Spindler, stop disrupting the meeting. Last warning.
Fuck the department's report dated June 5th, 2019. Fuck relative requests for authority. And fuck to destroy obsolete fucking original records. Because Pacific Area has racial profiled
President, the speaker's off topic.
Off
as
topic.
set forth. Well, let me stay on topic. Bitch will approve the department's fucking report because I'm fucking on transmit report topic to the city clerk who knows fucking well that when you stay on topic, you're fucking politically correct. So records under management, officers, and the request for the authority to destroy can't be obsolete. The public can certify you and address the issue whether or not they want to, first of all, examine, see, and physically touch these obsolete originals before you destroy them. Am I right, Mr. Bonner? For the Pacific Area? Because if I'm wrong, BBC, or what is it? BPC number 19-0162. I'm really fucked up if I'm off topic.
Wayne, please.
Okay, we gotta go old school. Case number fucking B, fucking P, fucking C, fucking number sign, fucking 1, fucking 9-1, fucking 6, fucking 2. The fucking department's fucking report.
Mr. President, the speaker's being
dated
redundant.
June 5th,
Redundant, off
2019, related to fucking request for authority to the fucking destroyed obsolete original fucking records for the motherfucking police Pacific fucking area as set forth in that goddamn fucking report. Motherfuckers' recommendations.
Hold on for a sec. Mr. Herman, you can leave the meeting. I have asked you not to wave your swastika sign and block people from behind. You can leave the meeting. Mr. Herman can be removed from the meeting.
You're saying that that's an actual disruption because I lift my
I said Mr. Herman can be, I told you not to block other people's views.
disruption?
Yeah. Well, I don't have to talk to you. You can leave the meeting.
Is that a factual disruption?
Mr. Herman, if you're not going to leave the meeting, we're going to recess because you're disrupting the meeting. No, Mr. Herman, you need to leave the meeting. Mr. Herman, then don't talk to me, talk to Mr. Herman. Mr. Herman, leave the meeting. Sir, you're exactly right. Exactly right. Mr. Herman, go.
Mr. Spindler
go
continues to disrupt the meeting also, Mr. President.
Mr. Spindler, go ahead with your speaking while he's leaving. Go ahead.
Fucking department's fucking report
Spindler.
based on the
Spindler.
fucking
You're
transmit.
off topic.
Again,
You're repetitive.
again off topic. Mr. Spindler, thank you.
I'm reading literally the
It's your
agenda
last warning.
item. It's here.
Okay, any other speakers on this item?
We have Lucas Martin.
Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin?
Hello. Thank you for not going into recess. I'm here today not to speak on that issue, but to say again that I wrote a petition to remove Steve Soberoff from the president of the
Off
police
topic.
commission from the board.
You're
Have
off topic,
copies
sir.
here
Second
for
off
the
topic.
public to take. Anyone here?
Sir, your time's up.
Signatures here. If you want to sign it in the back, I'll be in the back.
We have no other comment cards on that item, sir.
Move approval of F. All in favor? Aye. Let's go to item number 2A, the department's report relative to hazardous material unit audit. Do we have any commissioner questions or comments? Okay. So, I guess Captain Meek. Morning.
Morning, sir.
Good morning. Jeffrey Phillips, Commanding Officer of Audit Division.
Captain Meek, Emergency Services Division.
Morning.
Commander Kowalski, Counterterrorism Group.
Morning, sir.
And Wendy Gamble from Audit Division.
Morning.
Morning.
So before you have the Hazardous Materials Unit audit, the Hazardous Materials Unit is under Emergency Services Division. And this audit assessed compliance with Emergency Services Division's policy and procedures, as well as applicable state and federal regulations. We wanted to thank Captain Meek and her staff who provided the technical insight on the varying aspects of the unit. Based on the activity during the audit time period of June through November of 2018, the Hazmat Unit conducted sweeps of high-profile events and responded to calls for service approximately 85% of the time, while the remaining 15% of the time were dedicated to training. There was a total of 12 objectives and sub-objectives that were assessed. There were certainly some areas for which the unit did very well. However, there's some other areas we shared with Captain Meek and her staff that required some attention and for which they diligently moved in the direction of addressing those identified issues. And I'd like to summarize some of those areas. Objective 1B, examine the incident reports for the hazardous materials calls, in particular information that is required to be documented within the report as per the hazardous materials standard operating procedures. Of the 38 calls for service during the audit time period, there were a total of 24 that involved a suspected hazardous materials exposure. And Audit Division identified 18 that met the standard, and there were 6 that lacked some of the required information on the form. For Objective 2B, we examined a technician's recertifications. During the audit time period for this objective, there were 9 technicians within the hazmat unit that required to complete the recertification. Each of the 9 technicians did, in fact, they completed the recertification training. However, one of the technicians' statement of competency did not contain the required signatures. For Objective 3A, we assessed the annual physical that the hazmat technicians are required to have completed. Now, herein, one technician had not been deployed due to medical reasons, and therefore the remaining 8 technicians' occupational health screening cards were reviewed for indication of the annual physical. One member had an expired screening card, and the issue was brought to Captain Meek's attention. It was immediately addressed. Objective 3B examined the completion and submission of exposure reports during the technician's annual physical. So herein, the standard operating procedures require that total exposures and the sum of exposure times for each of the hazmat unit technicians be documented. Notwithstanding the fact that the hazmat unit's annual report did capture exposure times by incident, it did not, however, document the sum of exposure times for each technician as required by their SOP. Now, here it was further determined that this was due in large part to the manner in which the database was set up. So hazmat unit staff contacted Information Technology Group to address the data entry format that would now allows the information to be captured and queried. And this became effective January of this year. So aside from the objectives where we determine compliance according to policy and procedure, we also conduct an internal control assessment. Now, these are areas that may not necessarily be addressed in their standing operating procedures or department policy, but for which reasonable good internal controls are recommended. And therefore, these areas were addressed as performance assessments only. So for Objective 4A, we assess the security of the lab. We create a list of employees with access to the hazmat unit from Facilities Management Division. And there's a total of 38 employees who had access to the lab. Of the 38, 29 employees were authorized to have access to the lab. However, the remaining 9, although assigned to Emergency Services Division, were not assigned as technicians or in roles associated to the hazmat unit. Now, here we saw this essentially as having a strong internal control with regard to lab access would limit the employees' access to those assigned to hazmat unit or assignments that would necessitate their access. For Objective 4B, we evaluated the custody and the use of resources and records, such as comparing resources on hand and respective records. We found that the hazmat unit did conduct periodic reconciliations. We did have a discussion with Captain Meek and her staff on perhaps enhancing those periodic checks by indicating acquisition dates, the location of the equipment, and the condition of the items or equipment in documented into the KITS system. For Objective 4C, we also assessed the monitoring of the internal control system for incident reports and reconciling them with a call logbook for proper entries into the incident tracking system. And here, too, we found that the hazmat unit did conduct periodic checks of these entries. We did make a couple recommendations. One of them was with regard to Objective 1B, adding fields to the control system to ensure that all the boxes are completed in the incident report. And the other recommendation pertained to Objective 4A and limiting the access to the lab. That concludes my summary on the report. I certainly entertain any questions.
Let's open to Commissioner questions.
Good morning. Thank you for that summary and for the audit. And my question really falls into the category, while noting that there are many overall very positive outcomes of this audit, obviously maintaining accurate databases and accurate information with respect to everyone who's dealing in the hazmat unit is critically important. But it struck me, my first question is, what is the department doing to improve and ensure that the accuracy of all the records and the completeness of all the records. And as part of that, it struck me that many of these issues perhaps could be addressed through other databases that alert the department when there's a missing item or a deficiency of some sort. So I'd like to ask the department to address the steps moving forward, please.
Got it, sure. Yes, ma'am. With regard to the databases, some of those drop-down screens were just not applicable. So like any other police report, when you leave it blank, then it's assumed that you have not addressed that issue. My technicians did address the issue. They provided the information in the narrative of the database, but the drop-down screen was not accurate or did not accurately reflect what we needed. So we have worked with ITD. They have already given us, with respect to types of calls, agents, our responses. So in the areas where the audit did identify that we had deficiencies, we have already made those changes with ITD. With respect to some that were erroneously just left blank by the technicians, we have implemented a manual review system every month. The supervisor of the hazmat unit, as well as the lieutenant in charge of hazardous device materials section, does take hard copies of everything that is in that database, checks it for accuracy and for completeness. As far as another database that might trigger it, I don't believe that our system would be set up that way, but we can certainly look into that.
One of my concerns is on relatively simple administrative things, like a missing signature seems like something we should be able to overcome relatively simply. What processes and procedures are you putting in place to ensure that that's taken care of?
Yes, ma'am. With respect to that objective specifically, as well as the annual exams, we have created internal systems and controls to create projects to alert not only the supervisor, the lieutenant, and myself that those due dates are coming up. We've given ourselves enough lead time to ensure that the documents are completed and all the signatures are obtained in the timely manner.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay, do we have any public comments on this item?
We have 2 comment cards. We have Wayne and Adam Smith. And Michael Novak. I apologize.
Yes, I sense a cover-up here on 2A. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And, you know, the gentleman was right there partially. As you know, I was the chief of the Hazardous Material Unit from 2001 to 2008. And, you know, I admit I fucked up. And, you know, we used to take in the unit and have 2 signatures on each item. But over time, we realized that the LAPD had too much of this hazardous material unit, and we didn't want to get Cal OSHA involved, because if we did, then the police protective unit would be suing on behalf of the officers injured and forced to defraud the department. And Eileen Decker doesn't want that. T-Fang doesn't want that. And, of course, Mr. Mitchell Moore doesn't want that. So, you know, I had to do something this morning, and I apologize, and I shouldn't have done it. I filed a Cal OSHA complaint this morning on 2A. I'm sorry about that, but I had no choice. You know, as a former law enforcement officer, I see a crime being committed in my presence on 2A, and I just could not believe this report. Missing signatures, missing evidence, missing hazardous reports, illegal disposal of hazardous materials in violation of federal and state law. Shame on you. You put your officers at risk of health injuries. You put your cadets at risk. You put inspectors at risk. Shame on you. Shame on you, Ms. Decker. A federal prosecutor knows better than to commit a crime under color of authority. So you didn't want to file the report. That proves conspiracy. Join me and co-sign this Cal OSHA complaint. Shut this whole fucking thing down.
Next speaker.
Adam Smith.
Is this the last speaker on this item?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Novak after.
Oh, Mr. Novak.
Okay, Mr. Novak.
Since we're talking about the hazmat team, I just wanted to come up and say that I wonder and hope that, wonder if and hope that former Chief Charlie Beck thinks about Waukesha Wilson every day.
Next speaker.
Yeah, excuse me. If you look at this audit, it describes, sorry, it describes the hazardous material unit as an integral part of the LAPD's counterterrorism capabilities. So I think we need to recognize that the scent of fascism is in the air in this country, and that integrating the LAPD into the counterterrorism and counterinsurgency capacity of the United States government is not a proper mission for this department. And that every time we turn around here, we find another example of the militarization and the direction of the police into an agency that's designed to preserve and protect a system of oppression and exploitation. And I think it's outrageous that a unit that is designated to handle hazardous materials is not dealing with the enormous amount of hazardous material that's dumped into the streets of Los Angeles by businesses in Los Angeles, taking advantage of the fact that there are a lot of people living on the streets of the city and using it to use the city dumping ground as a dumping ground for their own toxic waste. And I also want to point out that in the audit it talks about the fact that the control of the hazardous materials lab is completely inadequate. It says that in their audit they found that 9 out of 38 people granted access to the lab should not have been given that access, were not really authorized or properly trained to do so. So I think it's outrageous that this audit basically demonstrates really, really poor handling of hazardous materials, inadequate service to the people of the city, and basically is another manifestation of the militarization of the police as a counterinsurgency agency, which is completely inappropriate. So I think you should, based on this audit report, you should shut down the hazardous materials unit of the LAPD.
We have a motion for approval of the department's report. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 2B, the Inspector General's report. And Commissioner...
There's no report in the file in the back.
Sir? Okay. Let's check that.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Chief. Good morning, everyone. Mark Smith, Inspector General.
Morning, sir.
With me in front of you today from my office are Assistant Inspector General Camelia Naguib and Police Special Investigator Jonathan Oda. Also with us today is Police Performance Auditor John Gorstidier, all of whom had a relevant stake in this report. We're going to present to you today the OIG's audit on the department's Suspicious Activity Reporting, or SAR, program for the years 2016 and 2017. As a matter of course, under Special Order Number 17, adopted by this Police Commission in 2012, the OIG is responsible for doing annual audits of the department's SAR program. When I arrived at the OIG, I recognized that the last report had been done for calendar year 2015 and wanted to bring us current. We have therefore combined our reports for 2016 and 17 to bring us back with current standards to audit this program annually. In conducting a review of this program, speaking generally as far as context or background, the SAR program is a facilitation of a partnership between the federal government and local law enforcement agencies to have a system by which activity that's deemed suspicious by those making the reports can be communicated and translated between each other. When we did our audit, we looked individually at each of 348 SAR reports during the two-year period we examined. One of the primary things that we look at, of course, is whether or not the department classified each of these SAR reports in accordance with policy. The staff is going to get into a little more detail about what that policy is and how the classification process goes, but we generally found that an overwhelming majority of the SARs were indeed classified in accordance with policy, as many as 98% of them. As we do when we look at any topic, we also looked systemically at the department's SAR program for any improvements or areas of tightening up that could occur, and we have some recommendations on that basis. With regard to what the SAR program is and what our findings were and our recommendations are, I'm going to turn it over to staff who'll give you a little more detail, but we'll be happy to answer all of us any questions you might have after the presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Special Investigator Oda.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Oda, Office of Inspector General and lead investigator for this review. As stated, the OIG set out to examine all suspicious activity reports for the years 2016 and 2017 with some of the following objectives in mind. First, wanted to confirm the number of affirmed and unfounded SARs for each year, as well as to ensure that each of those were properly classified.
Sir, I need you to sit down, please, with the camera. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Wanted to ensure that all identifying information from involved persons in unfounded SARs was disposed of properly. Also wanted to ensure that all reports involving officer contact with an involved person were constitutionally sound. And we wanted to, of course, identify any issues or areas of improvement with regard to SAR classification or any other aspect of the SAR process. Just by way of a little background, the SAR intake and classification process is detailed as mentioned in the 2012 Special Order number 17. Most suspicious activity reports are initiated by community members contacting the department with information. A few others are initiated by police officers. The reports either detail a target location, which is suspected of being the possible subject of an attack, or one or more involved persons, which are the individuals suspected of engaging in possible criminal activity with a nexus to terrorism. Once the reports are received by the Major Crimes Division SAR unit, the department personnel use the evaluation criteria in Special Order 17 to either affirm or unfound the SAR. According to the Special Order, affirmed SARs must meet the description of one of the 16 listed activities and behaviors, all of which are attached to this report in the appendix. In addition, the alleged suspicious activity must also be reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning related to terrorism or other criminal activity. If both of these requirements are met, the SAR is affirmed and is sent electronically to the Joint Regional Information Center, known as JRIC, which is a multi-agency collaboration that collects and analyzes the SARs received. If JRIC decides to accept the SAR, it may be assigned to federal personnel for follow-up, and the information in the SAR will be disseminated to relevant entities through the Federal Information Sharing Environment. If either of the requirements in Special Order 17 cannot be met, the SAR should be unfounded. SARs that the department have unfounded are typically not sent to JRIC and are kept for 1 year or until reviewed by the OIG, after which they will be destroyed. Any identified information related to involved persons that has been input into any department database, including Palantir, is permanently erased. A few general statistics from the report. In total, the OIG reviewed, as mentioned, 348 SARs, 231 for 2016 and 117 for 2017. For the year 2016, of the 231 SARs, 46% were affirmed, and of those, 57% were accepted by JRIC. For the year 2017, of the 117 SARs, 56% were affirmed, and of those, 48% were accepted by JRIC. Additionally, approximately 16% of the total 348 SARs were initiated by police officers, with all remaining SARs being initiated by community members, and 21% of the total 348 involved some type of police officer contact with the involved person. And finally, 48% of the SARs contained identifying information for the primary involved person, while the name and identifying information for the involved persons in the remaining SARs was unknown. And now for more detail on report findings and recommendations, I'll pass it over to Assistant Inspector General Camelia Naguib.
Morning.
Good morning. As was mentioned, a primary focus of the OIG's review was to determine whether department policies and procedures were followed for each of the 348 SARs that we reviewed. This included an assessment of whether the ultimate classification of the report, as affirmed or unfounded, appeared to comply with the parameters set forth in Special Order 17. Based on our review, we found that the vast majority of SARs were processed and classified in accordance with department policy. Specifically, we determined that the classification of the SAR appeared to comply with the relevant standards in about 98% of the cases. In the remaining 7 instances, we did not concur that the SAR should have been affirmed based on the information provided in the file. We also reviewed available information about each contact between a police officer and a person involved in a SAR, and found that in all but one case, officers articulated a legal basis for their actions. In the remaining case, which was captured on video and involved an inappropriate detention and search, we found that the issue had been properly addressed by the department through the complaint process. Another thing we looked at was whether, in cases where the SAR was unfounded, all identifying information had been purged from the relevant department databases. We found that this occurred in all but 2 unfounded cases that we reviewed. We referred those 2 cases to the department, and they moved quickly to remove this information from their systems. We also identified a few areas of the process that could be improved, and we made 5 recommendations related to these issues. First, we noted that the federal standards for SARs, which the department's policy is based on, have been updated since Special Order 17 was approved in 2012. We recommend that the department update its policy to be consistent with these updates, which we believe will add additional clarity to the SAR process. Second, we found that SAR notes did not always provide an explicit rationale for why a SAR was affirmed or unfounded, including in cases where the classification was changed after it was initially made. We recommend that the department require that analysts clearly note the rationale for each SAR classification decision, particularly any decision to overturn a previous classification. Third, in looking at the race or ethnicity of people involved in SARs, we noted that the largest group was made up of people categorized as other. We recommend that the department begin a process of looking at the other categorization to see whether there are ways that this can be done more effectively and precisely. Fourth, we noted 20 cases where information from an unfounded SAR was sent to JRIC or another agency outside of the SAR process. Although this may be appropriate in some instances, there did not appear to be specific parameters or accountability measures that govern when this should occur. To the extent that the department continues the practice of sharing this information, we recommend that it develop clear parameters regarding that process. And finally, we noted that a growing number of officer contacts related to SARs were captured on body-worn or other video, which we found very helpful to evaluating both the SAR and the basis for any officer actions. As such, we recommend that any associated video be reviewed as part of the classification for each SAR. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Commissioners, we'll start. In fact, the subcommittee will take.
The subcommittee was the use of force committee.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not on that. No, it was the
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I have a number of questions, and I'm not sure which of you should answer them, so I welcome a response from whoever has information. And these are not in any particular order, so forgive me if it doesn't quite flow. I was a little confused regarding the explanation as to why the number of SARs have decreased every year, and I'll explain why I'm confused. I think the rationale given was that better training has been conducted for the department, but because many of these reports are initiated by a member of the community contacting the department, I'm not sure how that would impact the number of reports going down. Because presumably if they came forward with a report and it wasn't founded, it would be designated as unfounded. So why did the number go down, or how do you make that connection? And I'm not sure.
So, Commissioner, good morning. Deputy Chief Horace Frank. I'm the commanding officer of Counterterrorism and Special Operations Bureau, so good morning to everyone. I think part of I would say that it's more accurate to say that part of that reason would be better training. I don't think we can attribute that decline solely to training.
Okay, so part of the reason would be law enforcement officers themselves might be making less reports as opposed to member of the public. And you don't have, or do you have any information as to why the numbers would have gone down almost in half from 2016 to 2017?
If I may,
you might be speculating, but
in discussions with the SAR unit personnel who conduct the trainings, part of the training, what they're telling officers in the field is to feel free to call the MCD SAR unit if they feel like they have a report of suspicious activity before they actually fill out the report. In some cases in previous years, a number of the unfounded SARs were situations that should not have, were not SAR-worthy to begin with, correct?
Commissioner, I think another reason is, and I think experience would tell us that whenever you have a major incident, you'll get a lot of reports. Keep in mind that the San Bernardino attacks were in 2015, so the further away we get from that, people tend to...
Chief Frank, can you speak up a little bit? Your voice is not being heard in the back.
I apologize. What my comments was initially was that one of the things that we've noticed from experience is that whenever you have a major attack or some occurrence, those reports tend to come in with a lot more frequency. But the further away we move from an incident, they become less frequent. So keep in mind the San Bernardino attacks were in 2015. So we saw a lot of reports then that covered the last period. But as we get to 2016, 2017, these things would dissipate. And we see the same thing happen with school shootings.
Very well. Next, and I think this would be for you, Chief Frank, can you tell me how does the department measure the value of this process, this program to the department? I assume it's not just by affirmed and unfounded or even affirmed by the JRIG, but it might have, there might be deeper meaning to the department that is not necessarily made public. And I'm not asking you, obviously, to reveal any particular case, but can you explain how does the department determine whether this program is being successful in achieving the goals as stated by the federal government of having a process where the public can report activities that they're concerned about?
Well, thanks, Commissioner. I think there are a couple of things, Commissioner, that I'll have Captain Law weigh in, but a couple of things that we look at. One is, and you're absolutely right, it's not an issue of affirmed or unfounded. Quite often we get reports that are unfounded based on the guidelines, but there are a lot of times when even within those reports, there are situations that will be very troublesome that it gives us that there is worth in looking into it further. And we've done that in several cases where even though a case may have been unfounded based on the parameters for the SAR process, we get investigators looking into it a little bit further, and we end up with situations where, in fact, we've determined in cases where while it's unfounded and while there's no criminal nexus to it, clearly have individuals in certain cases that may have some sort of help that we may need to embark them on that course in terms of getting them help. So from that standpoint, the answer would be yes, we've ended up with helping individuals who may need some sort of assistance, whether it's through our MEU process, mental evaluation unit process. Another area, it helps with it when it comes to information sharing in terms of developing a picture in terms of things that are occurring, not occurring. So you really cannot guide it in terms of, well, yeah, we had an incident happen or not incident, an incident not occur in terms of determining the success of it. The other thing is that we encourage people, and we do it all the time whenever we have a situation, something negative happens. We encourage people, if you see something, report it. Don't sit around and try to speculate in terms of, well, we're bothering the police or anything. We encourage people to do it. And when we have people reporting stuff to us because they feel comfortable reporting things to us, it's our responsibility to investigate it. But what we don't want people to do is not report something and then regret it later on.
So what I'm trying to, excuse me, there'll be opportunities for public comment, but what I'm trying to dive into is how do we know this program is successful? Does the federal government give feedback to the departments that are participating in this program to know maybe cases have been developed or incidents have been thwarted? There must be some measurement. This is a department that is so keen on measuring things and success. Is there a way that we're identifying how successful the program is? And it could be, and I don't know, if the JRIG is accepting certain cases as affirmed and fitting in their program, that might be a measure of success. But I'm looking for something broader of how we all can be assured that the department is in fact putting appropriate resources into a program that is valuable to the community.
I think the whole point of it, and with the 9/11 Commission, is just identifying intelligence gaps that we feel have been missed, because you have 911 systems, you have criminal intelligence that comes in, and this is trying to find a fix for that gap of, is it criminal behavior, is it just suspicious activity, and how and where do we record that? And like you mentioned, I think the cases where there is acceptance by JRIC is a good indicator that we have SARs that are, hey, we've done several levels of review and everyone concurs that this is something that we need to take another look at. And I think that's probably the best indicator for the department on how these are important.
So that the FBI has taken an independent evaluation and determined that was worthy for follow-up, is that what you're
Some of those are from the FBI, some of those are straight from the JRIC and doing an intelligence analysis of that information.
So Commissioner, and if I can weigh in as well, I don't know that this is a qualitative, this is more a qualitative than quantitative measure. The National SARS collection process is an outgrowth of tips and leads, as you know, as a former federal prosecutor, but to the Commission and to the public, the See Something, Say Something campaign is a manner of understanding what behaviors may be observed that raise suspicions as to a person's desires to formulate an attack and engage in attacks here in the homeland, in our communities. That may be activities such as we saw in San Bernardino, where bomb-making activities, the collection and gathering of items for a very horrific attack and the loss of life that later people look back and said, well, I knew my neighbor was engaged in this, wasn't really quite clear, didn't want to call the police because I don't want to be viewed as acting on some prejudice or bias. I think the process, the SAR process, is particularly helpful in that prior to its existence, what existed was tips and leads. With the SAR process, recognizing that many of these activities, as reported by a citizen or a community member or an officer, are constitutionally protected activities and may by themselves not indicate or form the basis of reasonable suspicion or probable cause that a crime is actually occurring. However, as a country and as a democracy, our people have said and expect of government that in such instances that we're acting diligently to try to determine whether or not, in fact, a crime is being contemplated and is being about to be perpetrated on our communities. Our evaluation of this is both locally, has been said, is how are those constitutional protected activities being honored, and at the same time, how and does the system reflect the cleaning, if you will, the sanitizing of this information in the sense of this does not amount to a reportable SAR event. And I think that demonstrates the process is working, is that those safeguards, those breaker switches are in place. The other point of this is, and I'll close, is that out of, for instance, 2017, where a total of 117 SARs, suspicious activity reports were made, 32 were accepted by the JRIC, which I believe was a bit of a conversation that Captain Long or Chief Frank indicated, which is independent of the department. JRIC, Joint Regional Intelligence Center, which would otherwise not know of these 32 instances, they determined that there was sufficient information to support further investigation to determine whether or not the underlying activity posed a risk or threat of violence and a threat to our communities. And then last issue, we saw just recently in the city where a young man plotted to create a series of attacks in our very region that others may have been aware of or may have used a suspicious activity report manner of bringing it to our attention. While that individual's activities were found.
Okay, that's the question. More. That's the question. Was SAR actually used?
Okay, I thought you were doing.
Oh no.
Okay, so I've given you a warning, and you'll have time to speak when we will not interrupt you, but you're not going to be interrupting when we're giving the presentation. So please allow us to give the presentation, or we'll give the presentation without you guys here. So you got a choice. It's your choice. Okay.
So my final position is that to the extent that the department of these 32 instances does not provide the details of what those 32 instances exist, certainly as a commission, a subcommittee properly appointed by the president does have access to the underlying source documents, and we welcome your engagement in that evaluation as part of the evaluation of whether or not this program does merit continuation by this department, which I firmly believe it does.
Thank you, Chief. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to add to what the president of the commission has said. I am very interested in hearing your comments. I'm also interested in hearing from the department, and I would ask you to kindly just allow this presentation to go forward, and then we will hear from you. So please bear with us, but we will listen to your comments. And thank you, Chief, for your input. And I very much appreciate that it allows, this process allows the broader government and all aspects of the government to try and connect the dots to prevent something from happening. That's very important. But you also mentioned a number of oversight procedures that are in place that are also very important by independent sources. But I'd like to turn back to the specifics of the audit and the compliance standards. And I'll say I've read, also because I was not here previously when the other audit, reports came out, sorry, not audits, the reports on the SAR program from 2013, 14, 15, and then of course the ones 16 and 17 today. And I see that fairly consistently the department has had a very high compliance rate in terms of meeting the policy, the standards articulated in the policy at 97% to 98%. But my question is, I think this goes more to the department because I see, or how I read the report, is that there's many layers of internal oversight. There's the officer, the watch commander, then major crimes looks over these reports. And my question is, there's a lot of ways to look at 97 and 98%. One hand, it's a very high compliance, something to be proud of, and yet on the other hand, why can't we get to the 100? Every year it seems to be there's a few issues. Maybe that has to be built into the process, but with all that internal oversight, I would hope we can do better. And I wonder if you can address that.
Well, Commissioners, I think the last audit prior to this one was 100%, even though there were some things that we could have improved upon. I think we addressed those particular issues. With regards to this one, there was some disagreement with the OIG in terms of things that should, whether or not some reports should have gone through or not. And while we may differ on those, I think the comments or the recommendations, the issues identified by the Inspector General's office in terms of more articulation, I think we totally are in agreement with that. And in fact, those are, I think there's 4 of the 5 recommendations. We were in total support of it because it goes towards updating our Special Order number 17 to be more consistent with the current SAR initiative. So we're totally in agreement with that. There were some wordings on the current SAR initiative that totally changes the meaning of things. Based on what the current special order says, that's why I believe the officers were acting based on the current special order, which was not consistent with the new SAR initiative, and we will correct that.
Okay.
So I think, again, we're in total support of the recommendations.
Okay, and maybe having brought better explanations will allow the IG's office to have a better understanding of why those decisions were made, and then can determine whether it's in compliance or not.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we do support the fact that there should be better explanations in terms of why some SAR audits were initially unfounded but then later affirmed. There should be better explanation.
Okay. If I could turn then to the categorization of, I think it's on page 7, I'm not sure, of the report, the other category that is discussed in the report as well. And seeing the breakdown of in the report, it's called dissent, gender, outcome, or dissent and outcome. In looking through past reports, there seem to be different categories used in each of the prior reports. I'm just wondering, where do these categories come from? Because my understanding of the SAR report is that it does, am I correct? It does not indicate ethnicity, but by reading the contents of the report is where the information comes from. Is that accurate? I'm just unclear.
That is correct. For this report in particular, this table that you've pointed to, the reported dissents, these are dissents that were written into the SAR report in the dissent field. Middle Eastern, Afghan, and Persian were actually written in. Typically it would be O for other, W for white, H for Hispanic, B for black, A for Asian.
And is that coming from the community member that's reporting the incident, or where does
the community member will report what their perception of the involved person's race or ethnicity, and the officer will record that down. And occasionally, as we stated in the notes, if listed as other, we were able to detect in the report notes if there was mention of what was mentioned that would cause an officer to write down other. It was not always listed in the report notes.
So just to add to that, there's a box on the actual SAR that asks for dissent, and that is where the officer lists black, white, Hispanic, whatever the case is, in some, or the other. In some cases, in the narrative, you have cases where the officer wrote Middle Eastern, but again, a lot of this is based on perception, which is the concern that we have, as opposed to in the case of a census where you actually interview the person and the person tells you what descent they are, the officer or the person, the citizen, is actually taking this all based on their perception. Clearly, when it comes to the situation of Middle Eastern, that's a problem area from the standpoint of what some citizen might believe a person to be Middle Eastern, because when you look at the definition of Middle Eastern, that could be an Israeli. And most people, the Israelis are categorized. Someone from Israel is categorized based on the definition from the Census Bureau as being Middle Eastern. But I think most people would agree that if you saw someone from Israel, you would you'd believe that they were white. So that's an area I think goes to recommendation C, that where there's a need for us to have a further discussion as to how we can best, more effectively reduce that other category in a way that's beneficial to the public and to get into where we need to get to in terms
I'm
of
sorry,
body.
I can't hear the speaker.
So this will be the last warning. You can speak now if you want to speak now, but we're just going to we'll go and do this without the public here. So I'm going to ask you, when it's your turn to speak on public comment, we promise we won't interfere, we won't stop you. You can do whatever you got to do. But when the department is speaking, we will have the same courtesy. Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting. You can leave the meeting. I'm not confused, and you can leave the meeting. Okay, well, you can leave the meeting. Because I asked you to stop speaking during the meeting. Sir, you can leave the meeting. If you can't leave the meeting, then the meeting's being disrupted enough to where we can't continue. You're not going to leave the meeting? I didn't ask what you want. I'm asking, sir, you're going to leave the meeting?
Because I want this meeting to go through. And
Thank you.
One thing I just want to say very clear, you're not listening to what we're saying, and you're paying more attention to what they're saying when the audit said that this shit didn't fucking work.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that.
So just be very clear with that. You're not being like very
Yeah,
clear with
we
what's
got it.
going on.
Okay, go ahead.
So this bias of like,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chief, could you repeat? I honestly didn't hear what you were saying.
So the point that I was trying to get to, commissioners, is that category of Middle Easterners, I think it goes to the heart of recommendation C, that we need to have a further discussion, because we certainly understand the concern that the Office of Inspector General has in terms of this other category being so big. When it appears that there are other factors that you can use to minimize that, and I think we can certainly have that. We need to have that discussion in terms of how do we go about minimizing that category based on all the information that's available to us.
And Commissioner, if I could add on this,
Yes,
is
sir.
a particular area of great sensitivity that we have. What you see is in the 2016 report, 4 instances of the 77 total. I'm sorry, of the total population that one was classified as Afghani, one was classified as Persian, one was Middle Eastern, and in reality, depending on awareness and background and understanding of cultures, all of those could be considered Middle Eastern, and yet so we see with RIPA in the state essence that the cobbling together of Middle Eastern and Asian can occur. Chief Frank, I'll build on his remarks regarding Israeli, Iranian, Arab, Saudi Arabian. There are many cultural makeups of the population of those nationalities. And so as we're working through reported suspicious activity, the underlying identity of the individual by their race, descent, or nationality is meant to be ignored because it's the behavior that we're looking at. But we recognize that with the number of others, the Inspector General's desire, and we will look forward to sitting down and trying to better understand how can we untangle this so that the other category on something such as descent is better understood. And is there a way of doing it while at the same time not feeding stereotypes or making this activity, which is already controversial and has its critics, add fuel to those stereotypes or add fuels to those criticism, as that our further effort to define this is actually creating more stereotypes than in fact refuting. So that's the essence of why we support the recommendation that we go at this. But how we got to this other was an effort of, frankly, not being offensive by describing certain categories of individuals based on really nationality more than ethnic makeup.
And is there any guidance provided? This is generated from a federal program. Is there any guidance provided by the federal government in terms of doing this?
Other than what we see in terms of the definitions from the Census Bureau, no.
No. All right. And just for clarity, I want to. You do support the recommendation of the IG item C to have, I believe it's
a discussion.
Further discussion involving this, because earlier you had said 4 of the 5 you agreed with. I just want to be sure it's all the recommendations.
Just that 4 of the 5 had to do specifically with revising Special Order 17 to deal with the new
Thank you.
guidelines.
I appreciate that clarity.
And
Okay.
we'll look to bring this on the national level as well, because as major city chiefs and as a sitting at the table in the National SAR Initiative, the fact that this area is so is defined as it is today, I think is an opportunity for us to lead in regards to this very issue across the country.
Well, I was going to suggest that, Chief, because this cannot be the only department that is having this struggle of implementing a program that is beneficial to the public and the community, and that the federal government has requested and encouraged departments to participate in, yet it needs to be done in a fair, transparent, unbiased way, and getting there requires the input of a lot of people to ensure that we're meeting those standards. So thank you for that, Chief. Commissioner Figueroa, did you have any? No, that's the committee. So.
Okay. Other commissioners? Commissioner Bonner?
Thank you very much. I think some of this ground may have been covered, but just still, I'm also clear. The first thing I wanted to clarify in terms of the context of the review is that this is more of a process review and not a policy review. In other words, you're not commenting on the merits of the underlying policy one way or the other. You're just commenting on the process. Is that accurate? Correct. Okay, great. And maybe a question for the chief along those lines, by the way. Do you know when was the last kind of broad look at the policy?
2017, 2012.
Yeah. So 2012 was a major revision where we actually downsized the number of activities that would be subject to classification within a SAR. There were other major changes. What the department is, how we missed the 2015 revisions that was made on the national level is something that we need to address and understand and update. So this next effort will be to not just pursuant to the recommendations, but to update that. And I suspect that whatever we come to with an agreement relative to the dissent issue, that'll be brought into that special order and brought before this commission for consideration.
Okay, and I think Commissioner Decker asked this question also, but I didn't quite understand in terms of the question of the overall effectiveness of the policy, whether it's here at the LAPD or just nationally. Is there information available that looks at really the overall effectiveness?
There has been, and I'll look to Captain Long or Chief Frank. There have been reports by the FBI and Department of Justice relative to the SAR program. And I'll let them speak to more specifics as to that, any of one that comes to mind most recently.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the key is to focus on the qualitative SAR versus the quantitative. So the numbers, if you look at percentage numbers, you're going to have a low percentage of SARs that actually lead to good terrorism. I think right off the bat, the ones that JRIC accepts is about 30% each year. I'm trying to go back over past reports also. So you're already starting at below a majority, but the key is we don't want to miss that one thing and closing that intelligence gap while balancing that with the protecting the public's right to privacy.
So with regards to specific reports, I'm not aware of any specific ones, but I will be more than happy to check with the FBI and some of our other. I'll be happy
I
to
would
check with our counterparts at the FBI
Go ahead.
and DHS and see if any of those reports exist and get back with the commission.
I appreciate that. Along those lines, in terms of looking at it, does the department or any of the other agencies look at what comes out at the other end of this? In other words, is there someone that does look at either the number of reports that result in a thwarted effort or some arrest or some actual conclusion one way or the other? Or is it just processing data?
Anecdotally, we do know of arrests that have come as a result of many of these reports. We do know that a lot of, as indicated in the report, that many of these were accepted by CT6. In terms of the specific numbers and specific instances.
Frank, can you describe CT6, please?
I'm sorry. So CT6 is the counterterrorism, is one of our
it's a task force made up of.
So it's one of our joint terrorism. I'm drawing a blank. One of the joint terrorism task forces. There are several of them. CT6 is the counterterrorism. That is actually the threat squad. They're the ones that receive these and evaluate all the threats, and then would parse it out to a particular threat squad based on what the issue is.
And Commissioner, to your question, do we look at the entire stream from the moment a SAR is initiated to the extent that it is then accepted by Counterterrorism Squad 6, which is the tips and leads of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is the multi-agency, federal, state, and local initiative here in Southern California that looks at each of these threat streams. Each one of those is itemized, and there is a monthly and quarterly update process for executives all the way down to individual investigators that will talk about the disposition. And some of those dispositions are closed with no further action because the investigation could not substantiate during the preliminary period sufficient information to continue that investigation. Others have resulted in federal prosecutions, arrests and federal prosecutions of individuals who plotted and or involved themselves in criminal activity that sprang from the SAR. What we're not prepared today, and this report has not done, is evaluated over the course of a 2-3 year period. Some of these investigations go on for quite some time, but we're not prepared today to talk to you that is it 1 out of 37, is it 15 out of 100? What the chief was correct in saying, or Captain Long, we cannot look at this as a 10% factor. The events of the enormity of the threats that are posed don't work well for statistics. It is instead a tips and leads as an intake and funnel that's meant to identify the one instance that would otherwise not be found. But I would encourage the subcommittee that this commission has the authority to use regularly to meet with the chief of counterterrorism special operations and ask for a classified briefing relative to the outcomes that we've seen in the last 5 years. And I am confident that we will demonstrate that that there are instances in which these reports of what would otherwise be lawful activity but is suspicious has generated investigations that have demonstrated and proven individuals that have plotted against and plotted to and or committed violence here in this region.
I appreciate that. I think that would be helpful and appropriate. And obviously, there's sensitivities around the kind of information that can be disclosed. But in your opinion, then, I suppose you could even go back to 2009 or that era when this program was 2008, 2009. So that's 10, 11 years. Because I don't know if anybody ever has or could comment. I mean, your point is well taken. It's not a percentage kind of result where you can't really say, hey, there was this percent, and that's how you know it's effective. But I think it would be helpful to understand otherwise one can assert its effectiveness. One can feel that it's more likely than not to be effective, but one has difficulty understanding really what the data show.
So I think, again, another aspect of our report back to you that I think would be valuable is there are critics of this program and there are also those that advocate for it, is for us to do a better job of coming back and articulating both. And that is what has the FBI and the intelligence community asserted as to its findings. The National SAR Initiative, which has existed now for 12 years, has had has evolved and has continued, and it has had its challenges, and yet it's also had its successes. And I think that a better conversation with the subcommittee and then the broader group is to get into those specifics as to why we see this as an underlying and a needed strategy as we attempt to interrupt or prevent violence from occurring.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we both are sensitive to staying on the agenda item for today, which is this report. Which and I appreciate the fact, speaking now to the OIG as well, that this particular audit was not targeted at the broader policy, but I think the discussion is amplifying a need for a future look and agenda item on that topic as well, so that we can explore it in a little more detail.
Well, the subcommittee will take that up. And then should there be a revision of the policy, I think that would be the appropriate forum to have the broader discussion.
Okay, a couple more questions. In terms of the guidelines, the federal guidelines, are they a complete pass-through, or does the department also either have a history or at least authority to contour the guidelines as they see fit for this department?
Because I'm not sure I understand the question.
What I'm asking is, sometimes you have a set of federal rules or regulations that a local, state or local jurisdiction is required to adopt in their entirety in order to participate in a federal program. In other cases, you have guidelines, which are simply guidelines, which means here's generally what you can do, but you can choose to contour them to your own operation. I'm asking, which one are we dealing with here?
If I understand you correctly, then
do you have discretion to
Yes,
vary in any way from the federal guidelines, or are they a mandate essentially passed down as to how you have to administer this program?
So the National SAR Initiative, in terms of these guidelines, these are the ones in terms of what constitutes a SAR. This is what we go by. Now, we do have input, I should say, when these guidelines are developed based on our involvement in many of these committees, federal committees committees at a national level that we're involved in. We do have the opportunity to give input into those guidelines.
And so, and whether or not the JRIC or a SAR is accepted by the federal system, it must meet the requirements of the National SAR Initiative.
Sure.
The organization ourselves work with guidelines that are at the direction of this commission. We believe the SAR guidelines on the national level meet the requirements of this commission and my expectations. We make adjustments that may not meet the federal government's requirements, for instance, in instances in which the Chief alluded to, an individual experiencing what we believe is potentially mental illness or is mental illness that may not meet a SAR, but is behavior and potential outcomes of their behavior without support and assistance could pose a risk to themselves or to the community. That's something that's outside and apart from SARS, but it's something that we as an organization here in Los Angeles have seen, and this was developed with the CAMP program as an outgrowth of the CAMP program, where persons experiencing significant mental illness came to our attention via a SAR. The SAR was unfounded, but the person's welfare, both themselves as well as their immediate community, was of concern to us. So while it did not go into the national environment, and that intelligence environment, it stayed locally here, and we've continued to work with Department of Mental Health and others to try to mitigate or resolve that circumstance so that person is safe both for themselves as well as the community.
But what you're confirming here, though, is that when we get to in the future, when we get to this discussion that's maybe more direct to the policy, we'll have an opportunity then to inform whether we think the department's participation in the program should strictly follow simply the federal guidelines or maybe adjusted in some way appropriate for the operation here.
I agree. First, on the descent, for instance, whatever the national requirements are, if we desire as a city to be more granular in that, what I would hope and look for us to do is then to have a map as to how that then meets those requirements if we transfer that information to the national environment. If we don't, then it serves our purposes. That's what's most critical to us.
Appreciate that. Okay. What, if any, special training do the officers, so when there's a citizen report that comes in, is there any special training that the officers receive in order to make sure that it's handled appropriately, other than the special directive?
Well, we have the special directive, but we also have Watch Commander Supervisor School and the Academy. Yes. So all of those and roll call trainings throughout the year. Our SAR group handles all that, and I think the key focus we've had in this last year, so that training's all been in place since this was created, but the key is that earlier inclusion of major crimes in the taking of the SAR, so we can give advice. And that's another thing we're going to be looking at. Instead of it being that we are contacted, it'll be prior to taking a SAR, you shall contact the on-call person for major crimes to seek advice. And I think that's an important part of the sort of the fix we're going to have here, is having that is not only you have the training that we provide for every single officer and their watch commanders and sergeants, but involving us earlier on prior to that SAR being taken. And I think that'll help fix a lot of the problems.
I think, and again, a lot of this is, I am going to note, goes really to this future discussion around the policy, but it's an area that I think is ripe for or at least the potential for bias anytime you're dealing with any classifications of descent or ethnicity or what have you. And then you add to that the potential for abuse on the behalf of citizens who just call up, right? I mean, and so I'm just pointing out that these are reasons why I think what we need, what the commission needs, is not only the process-oriented review, but I think the policy discussion at the appropriate time. And by the way, at least as we sit here now, what protections are there against the risk of abuse? I mean, given that, if I'm reading this correctly, the overwhelming majority of these reports are generated by citizen complaints, right? And in particular, when we see the chart, I don't know if you care to comment, anyone, on the or even speculate the why you have such a disparity of complaints coming from the valley and those areas. Excuse me, but the question is, what protections, if any, are in place to make sure that there isn't, some potential for abuse?
Well, Commissioner, I think Captain Long touched on that, and that is the training that we're constantly giving our officers in roll call training, supervisor school training, watch commander school training. We're constantly doing that training. We have TLO summits where all this stuff is discussed also every year, these summits. But additionally, the fact is that before officers are taking these reports, we're going to be requiring them to contact us first before just putting it in reports.
Okay, just a couple others. One is for those that are unfounded, or if I'm the subject of a report, do I know that ever?
That the report was unfounded?
Yeah, so if my neighbor calls and complains some suspicious activity, I'm doing something that they think is suspicious, is there any point at which I'm ever aware that I'm being looked at? Or I don't know, I'm not necessarily sure that I'd say when you should and when you shouldn't. I'm just asking.
And in many cases, Commissioner, that wouldn't be the case, because a lot of the IPs or folks that we don't know about, it's just someone who called and said, we saw this person with not much descriptions, and we take the SAR.
Let's go ahead and talk about personal information. Michael Moore is identified as being allegedly involved in a plot against the homeland.
No.
Captain Long, if we would discuss that as a tip or a lead or as a SAR, what is treated, what that intel report results as far as if no enforcement action results against that individual?
That information will be taken out and scrubbed out of that information after a year, and in the whole.
I want to make sure I tee up let's say the complaint is Michael Moore is out taking pictures of some infrastructure asset, and the question is, well, why is he taking those pictures? To me, if I'm understanding, you're saying nobody goes to him to say, why were you taking pictures of? Or that's what I'm understanding is maybe you do some investigation and the person's just not aware that it's in the context of the SAR review. But I'm trying to understand what point does the person who may be engaged in some sort of activity that someone else deems suspicious has some opportunity to comment on why they're doing what they're doing?
So if I understand you correctly, Commissioner, assuming we make contact with the individual?
That's one question, is do you?
Okay, let's go with that scenario. Assuming we make contact with the individual, the officer, or if it's followed by major crimes, makes contact with that person, does the preliminary investigation. In the event a SAR is done and then it's later unfounded, then do we contact that person later on and say, hey, by the way, a SAR was done and we unfounded it? Is that your question?
Well, I'm asking, let's go back to the first part of it. When you contact that person to do the investigation, are they aware that the reason you're contacting them is because someone has made a complaint of suspicious activity?
It could be, yes, sir. Sometimes that would be the case.
But let's
Right.
talk about let's go back to the
Right.
beginning with Captain Long. You have a suspicious activity report listing Michael Moore. There may be. Let's talk about the investigative process to include whether or not the individual is told as to the basis of why this investigation is started. And like every criminal investigation, there are tactics and strategies in which are case dependent, in which the offender or the suspected individual may or may not be told as to not to compromise an investigation. And so, but let's talk about that to the issue of Michael Moore's identity is now on a suspicious activity report. When does Michael Moore, if ever, am I ever told of instances in which I may learn that, or the instances in which I may not?
Right. So I'm going to deal with the unfounded. If it's reviewed immediately and unfounded on its face, there's no set procedure on contacting that person because it was reviewed by somebody that does the SAR and says there's no basis to this report. And we do not do follow-ups. Whether we want to do that and implement that, that's another question. For an investigative one, it would depend on the investigative strategy. Is it best to inform this person, or is it best not to inform them and question them or look into other parts of his activity? And it could branch off a million different ways you might want to investigate that. On some of those, yes, you would contact them and let them know. In other times, it might lead to an arrest, which then he would get into the discovery system. Other times, you might not let them know because it might lead into something in the future where you go, we don't really have enough to do anything at this point, but this is a good lead that we may want to have to look at in the future. Once we do that for the SAR, though, is after a year that public information that SAR is removed, and then the whole thing is purged after 5 years.
Just to, on that point, on the first scenario where you look and it's closed kind of on its face, does any information linger around anywhere in that situation?
Well, if the SAR is taken, it should be, and unfounded, it's purged out immediately.
Immediately. And then in the second case, there's some sort of investigation that's unfounded, and that's when it hangs around for a year.
And then we'd be purged. So it's what's called the PII, public, the personal information is purged after a year, and then the whole SAR is purged after 5 years.
And is there, let's say during that year process, if I'm the subject of the SAR and during that year process it's closed or maybe open for that matter, if I'm stopped for some other reason or have some sort of interaction with the department, some other reason, is anyone aware that that the fact that somebody has reported me through a SAR is also one element that may be raised in the context of another investigation?
After a year or in that first year?
Well, I mean, the question really is ever, but let's just talk about the first
So it
year.
sort of depends on how the investigators set up their alerts. There's alerts we can have set up or not set up. So yes, there could be an alert, or depending on the investigation, they might not set up an alert or let people know. So it could be either or.
Did you have something to comment on that as well?
Well, we looked at whether the information was purged, and I think the findings for that is in our report. But in terms of whether there's a disclosure, I don't believe that's part of the process.
I think.
And by the way, just last issue, because the Inspector General reported on this, there are also instances in which personal identifier information was passed on to the federal enterprise, to the JRIC, that were on unfounded. So the SAR was itself classified as unfounded. However, the information we believed was also still met the criteria of a tip or lead, and rather than protect or shield the intelligence community from having access to that to see whether or not that information tied into any other unrelated information, that information was provided to the JRIC. Then the federal government has its own requirements subject to Congress as to what levels of that information is kept, and including disclosures.
And you got my that was my last question was when the department, for lack of a better term, purges information. Is something already reported in the federal process where it may linger around under somebody else's policy or procedure, or
For it going through the JRIC, it'll get purged. PII will get purged for 1 year, And then after that, that information should get purged in 5. And I'll have to research the 30-year that's being thrown out here. But my understanding of the system is 1 year for PII and 5 total.
But just for the layperson who's not following all of the acronyms and so on, just simply, are there any situations where the department's closed an investigation, determined that the information should be purged after that 1 year, but perhaps it's already in a federal database, and maybe someone else, you're still hanging around, you're not in your system, but you've been reported into someone else's system?
Commissioner, that would be best addressed, I believe, by the respective Department of Justice or the other parts of the intelligence community that have access to that information as to what their holding or archive responsibilities are. And that's all subject to Congress. What our reviews are compliant with the SAR initiative and this commission's expectation is to treat this information much as we do other intelligence sources, field identifiers, FI cards, gang databases, databases that are involve actions and activities of individuals who have not been accused of a crime, but this is investigative information relative to their possible involvement in crime.
One thing I would say, just in closing, at least my comments, is when we get to the future conversation of the policy, I would want to understand in the context of information sharing, for example, that I'd want to understand how much, if any, we know about how other parties will use information before we disclose it. So that would be a helpful line of inquiry in a future review as well. Thank you.
Let me add one thing to your, or try and ask a complimentary question. Someone is, during this year period or even the 5-year period, they're applying for a job. They're applying for a job at Google, or they're applying for a job at, I can imagine if they're applying for a job at the Pentagon, maybe that it'll be different. Or applying for a job at, at Whole Foods. What, does this show up on these reports?
No, it should not unless it turned into a criminal case. And then once it turned into a criminal case, obviously you'd have a prosecution there, and all that would be in discovery, and that's where it would show up.
So let me be very clear, because anyone listening to this, SAR information, if it just stays within, as it stays within the SAR Suspicious Activity Report, as it stays within that environment, is not publicly disclosed. It's not individual involved competing for a job, asking to compete to go to a university, background checks and so forth, absent a government classified intelligence setting, that information would not be known.
That clarifies it. Thank you. Commissioner?
And I would just add something regarding whether somebody who's the subject of a suspicious activity report that's been passed to the federal government, isn't it up to them whether they contact that person? They're the ones then charged with the investigation, right? It's not LAPD, is that right?
That would be correct.
So you don't have any control at that point?
No.
Whether they notify somebody because they're doing the investigation,
that
is that
right?
Correct. So you're collecting information that once affirmed is then passed on?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, do we have public comments on item number 2B?
Yes, so we have 23 cards.
Okay.
The first 3, Sherry Verone, Michael Novick, and Hamid Khan.
Morning.
I've never spoken here before, but I find this is a very important issue to talk about, and which is this the mic? Oh, okay. This SAR program tends to create a culture of suspicion and paranoia, and I've noticed as everybody probably has noticed in the news, how much suspicion it has created, and even school children of color going on field trips, suspicion is just raised about them, and they're harassed, and I think it's all part of this culture of paranoia, and it reinforces social biases. And I'd also like to say something else that my experience, I think you spoke to how you listen to public comments out the board, and my experience here has been that you may listen to what the public has to say, but I have not seen any changes in any attitudes about anything. And there's lots of good points that are made during public comments. I also would like to say, which might be off the record or might be, off topic, that I need to do in the public, the other part, but the time of your meeting, I wanted to go to the Board of Supervisors meeting today also, and it seems like these meetings are held at the same time on purpose to limit the amount of public comment that is given. And that's all.
Thanks for your comment. Next speaker, please.
Yeah, we should look at what the genesis of this program is. You're talking about going back really to Dick Cheney and the defense secretary that talked about unknown unknowns and the need for a total information climate. We're in the era of endless war, and that's what this is a part of. So I think you need to recognize that having a counterterrorism and special operations bureau of the LAPD in charge of these reports is the fundamental problem. You're dealing with, again, counterinsurgency and inappropriate activities for a police department. Eileen Decker asked why the reports have gone down, given that it's nothing to do with training, if it's civilian reports. And I think you might look to the fact that over the last couple of years there's been an outrage at the level of the Muslim ban and racial profiling by the federal government, leading to revulsion on the part of people. There have been increasingly embarrassing disclosures of white people reporting black people police for barbecuing while black and sleeping while black and walking while black. And if you want to understand why people are stopping to give these reports despite the paranoia that's constantly being generated by law enforcement and intelligence operations, that might be a reason why. My ex-wife and her second husband are bird watchers. They're often out with binoculars. She's Jewish and he's Armenian, and nobody gives it a second thought. But if somebody is Muslim or someone is black out with binoculars, suddenly that becomes suspicious activity. You're trying to make a recommendation that you find better criteria for submitting unfounded suspicious activity reports to JRIC. I think that's ridiculous. You need to stop the whole program. There's suspicious inactivity here. It's the inactivity of the LA Police Commission in putting a stop to these outrageous programs.
Hamid Khan, followed by Kai Utsumi and Akil Gopal.
So let's start off by who has evaluated this program. This is a report from October 2012 from the U.S. Senate Subcommittee. And this is from Carl Levin and Tom Coburn, former U.S. senators. And they talked about intelligence gathering, which comes out of SAR programs at fusion centers. And I quote, they called it flawed, irrelevant, useless, inappropriate, or unrelated to terrorism. And then when Mike Downing, who used to be before Horace Frank, was asked by the LA Times that, what do you have to say about this? And his comment is, and I quote, this is like going to October 2012, there's a lot of white noise, but there are occasional gold nuggets. And when he was further pushed to report any convictions, he pointed to zero conviction. This was Mike Downing, right, who basically started this program. So I think what we heard today is another spin. What we heard today is to kind of run circles around you like they try to do it with the laser program. Let's talk about purging, right? They're talking about purging and it's going to get out. The IG audit itself says that, Palantir retains other pertinent information related to SAR, such as location, date of occurrence, and case synopsis for 5 years, even if it's purged out of there. And then about an unfounded SAR, occasionally information and details about an unfounded SAR are forwarded to other departmental units for further investigations. So there's so much spin and bullshit that you're listening to. We asked to do a detailed presentation, but of course Soboroff is scared because the truth is going to come out. So we're back to square one. It's presumption of guilt. It's about, weaponizing iWatch in the hands of, and you see, 84% of these are coming from the community. And 59% are coming from the Western Valley Bureau, which is majority white populations. And 51% are unfounded out of all of this. Last year in 2016, 58% were unfounded. So what you have is this frivolous bullshit that is given in the hands of racist people, especially at these political times, what's going on with the level of violence that we see every day, the level of harassment and tracking. How there have been 9 black trans women who have been murdered as a result. They're suspect.
Next speaker, please.
This is based on presumption
Next speaker, please. You come back during public comment, sir. Next speaker.
What the Inspector General's report shows is what the black and brown community knew for decades and decades, going to centuries, that there is white supremacist racism in this country, and the police department, including LAPD, are part of enforcing that racism and carrying it out. The racist profiling by LAPD, for instance, when Black Lives Matter protests of all the black and brown people killed by law enforcement, police, and so many of them, they come in and shoot first before even thinking, okay? So I think a lot of the racist profiling by the SARS and I Watch committee, it carries on to racism by individual police or itself. So this whole program has to be shut down. It has to be shut down. I Watch and Suspicious Activity Report, and there's so much secrecy in it. When you have secrecy, secrecy becomes part of the police department, and it becomes a secret society. So I'm for an open democratic society. So, and the I Watch program is a license to profile and creating racialized violence and racism. Open, formal police investigation without a person's knowledge is secrecy. It's secrecy that leads to more secret police Gestapo type.
The next three speakers, Akil Gopal, Stella Coleman, and Tiff Guerra.
So I have a few assorted thoughts. First, shout out to Horace Frank, who cares so much about Israelis being labeled Middle Eastern, when he led a delegation of 8 LAPD officers to study surveillance tactics from Israeli surveillance companies and speak about LAPD's data practices there as well. And then another thing I wanted to say is that there's this talk about how this is not profiling by identity, it's profiling by behaviors. But we all know in this room that profiling by behaviors is licensed to profile by identity. That's exactly what you all are doing. And we also know that the behavioral surveillance, the idea that behaviors lead to other violent behaviors, is junk science. And even if you believed it, let's look at this list. And let's look at how many of these so-called suspicious behaviors apply to the cops in this room. So first of all, theft. Let's think about civil asset forfeiture when we think of theft and all of the millions of dollars that LAPD has stolen. Breach. Let's talk about the houses that the LAPD has burst into. Let's talk about eliciting information and making lists. Let's talk about recruiting and financing and think of the cadet school. Let's talk about photography and think of the drones and observation, surveillance, and the acquisition of weapons. I mean, you guys are armed to the teeth with military surplus weapons. So but what we see all here, what we in this room see is a group of people making secret lists while they're armed to the teeth and pre-operationally planning to use violence. That's what we see. So who are we suspicious of in this room? We're suspicious of you all. And that's based on your junk science of behavioral surveillance where we have history to back us up. You have zero people that your system has caught. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the last year alone that you have killed. So who are we justified in being suspicious of? Shut this fucking program down.
So I'm Chella Coleman. I don't usually come to these things because I don't believe y'all listen. So I'm just going to go saying what I want to say. I think y'all cut him off while he was Hamid Khan, while he was talking about the 9 transgender black bodies that we have lost because they are deemed as other, because you engage, you incentivize, you encourage people to watch other people to do what they want, to see what they want to do. I also just want to say something. I am a black person first. That means that I'm suspect already. I've gone to ask different hours of operations. Ooh, wow, I'm sure there's a SARS about me. And I'm also a trans person. So I know there's a SARS about me. So fuck these SARS, shut them down.
So we've heard a lot of words in here today, but at its core, the Suspicious Activity Reporting System is a program to get the community reporting on other people more. It's just to get all that information. We heard that from Horace Frank himself. And with this program, like every policing program, what we need to be asking and what you all need to be asking is who is being most impacted in this system, right? And we get an idea of that when we understand who is doing the reporting. And we know without even looking at the information in the audit who is doing the reporting, right? And it's going to be like, who's going to be calling the police? It's going to be people in the white communities. It's going to be people who don't have a problem with police. It's going to be people who trust police. That's who's going to be making these reports. So you have set up this system that is for white people to be doing this reporting. You know it's for white people to be doing this reporting. And then we know who is going to be reported on, right? It's going to be anyone who falls outside of the norms of this white group that is very cis-het-centered, able-bodied. This group, anyone who falls outside of these norms is who is going to be deemed suspicious and who is going to be reported on. And so what you have created and what you are funding is a system that is legitimizing the fears of this group that is doing the reporting, and you're telling them not only to listen to these fears, listen to your instincts, don't look at this list of things, but just if you feel suspicious, we want you to report that. You let us worry about it. You're legitimizing those fears. You're telling them you need to act on it. You need to take action. And this leads to harm being done to people in communities who historically have been on the receiving end of harm. And that's what this system is doing. And we also need to draw a very clear connection between programs like this that other people and that tells the community to listen to their suspicion and to act on them. We need to draw a clear connection to this type of program and the harm that is being done in communities right now.
Next speaker, please.
The next 3 speakers.
Come back during public comment. Thank you. Next speaker.
The next 3 speakers, Miguel Guzman, Mimi Soltisic, and Nadia Khan.
Go ahead.
Mimi Soltisic. I can't pronounce your name, I'm sorry. Soltisic.
A bit ago, the police chief made reference to our democracy. We actually don't live in a democracy. And if we had a democracy, we wouldn't have a program that profiles and criminalizes people for taking photographs, using video cameras, drawing diagrams, taking notes, using binoculars, and inquiring about hours of operation. We don't have a democracy. What we are is a white supremacist police state. And you can all choose. I mean, the IG's the audit clearly shows the racist impact of this program. Law in the U.S. is overwhelmingly written to protect and serve white property rights. And looking at the results of the audit, that's exactly what this program is doing. It's racist by design. You all can choose to shut this program down. Shut this fucking program down.
Nadia Khan.
To the point that was made earlier about the timing, I haven't been able to come to these meetings because these are at very inconvenient times for students, for teachers, for a lot of working people. I've talked about the SAR program to my students, just completely laying out the facts, and they would pack this room saying it's bullshit. The youth that packed the Board of Supervisors all the time would also come and say this is bullshit. So I want to start with that as well. And it's interesting because just with all the politicking, the questions never really got answered. So if you really want your questions properly answered by quantitatively and qualitatively, go to Stop LAPD Spying, Google that, and then Google People's Audit. We audited Special Order 1 when it was called Special Order 1. And I was reading through it, and I was like, dang, it still applies to the same Special Order 17. So that's where you're going to find, to answer the questions, the 2012 Senate report, which said that the fusion centers were flawed, irrelevant, useless, inappropriate, or unrelated to terrorism. You can also look to the qualitative point, since that's what y'all are claiming to have. The 2008 National Academy of Science says behavioral surveillance is junk science, and there is no scientific consensus that it should be used for counterterrorism. There is too little known about what patterns indicate terrorist activity. So, as somebody who's been in academia, fuck academia anyways, but the fact that even them, your own peoples, your own government, and your own qualitative measures are saying that should show you something. Not to mention the impact, going back to the qualitative analysis that this has. Teachers are being trained because SAR has set the precedent now for teachers to now look for suspicious behaviors under the FBI, that questioning authority, speaking against, criticizing foreign policy, right? Being angry, being in poverty, being a migrant. These are suspicious behaviors and identities under FBI guidelines. So yeah, Chella.
Next speaker, please.
The next three speakers, Jamie Garcia, Chanel, and Adam Smith.
So I think we're finally getting to the crux of what the community wants right now. And we want an entire policy review, because what you constantly give us, Inspector General, is no concern for human or civil rights, but just procedural. 99% accurate, 98% accurate. So what we do want, Dale Bonner, to your statement, is we do want a time and a place where because it's obvious here in this room that there's a lot of criticism about this program. And there are police agencies that have opted out. There is a way for us not to participate in this program, because there is very little evidence. Even you yourself, Moore, you were trying to say, oh, maybe it led to something happening that maybe somewhere down the line led to something. 10 years, 12 years, there's got to be something that states whether this led to anything. And you can't give us a direct answer. That should show you that this program is ineffective and it's just primarily about data mining. More and more data about how we behave, where we're at, so that you can implement and decide reasons why you can incarcerate us preemptively, you can kill us preemptively, that you can just do whatever you want because you deem us suspicious. But now you're enlisting the community. Now you're inciting violence in the community. Now you're saying, even if it's nothing, report it to us. Even if you feel something, report it to us. And everybody's here saying there is an increase of violence against the trans community. There is constant violence against the black community. And you are encouraging that. You are creating the stage for that. That needs to tell you that is not community building. That is not community building. The type of community policing you are creating is creating conditions for people to be murdered. That is what you continue to do. It's the violence of policing. We don't want it. We don't want to set up things. I mean, it's really before the bullet hits the body. These are the conditions you're setting up.
Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Chanel.
Come on up. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Okay, so very much has been said here, so I don't need to say as much. I can literally speak to the fact that the program that you guys are encouraging people to participate in this system of gentrification that we're like pushing in LA, where you have people who are unfamiliar with the communities and the cultures moving in because they're taking these big tech jobs, who don't understand, who don't know that on this day of the week, this family plays this ranchero music, or on that day of the week, my family barbecues. So yes, it's gonna get a little loud, but just because it's loud doesn't mean suspicious activity is taking place. But you're not used to fireworks randomly happening. You're not used to this music. You're not used to family arguments that get a little bit out of hand because people are playing a game of spades. They're not used to these things because they don't know anything about the culture, but they've moved here randomly. And rather than getting to know their neighbors, to understand why that person on the corner might talk to themselves a little bit, to understand why this particular couple is consistently arguing, but they love each other very much, you told them, you've incentivized them to view everything that is new or different to them as some kind of wrong, as it must be a criminal, as this person is not gonna keep you safe, as this person is not your neighbor. When you create a situation among an entire city where you're telling people that people are not their neighbors because you are supposed to be suspicious, you're creating a problem. You're sentencing people's children to die. That's what you're doing by having this program being here. I know that I'm usually speaking more on a data-driven perspective, but because of so many people are so much better on this data than me, I just have to take it to the personal anecdotal story because that's the only way I know how to do it. This program is not okay, and it actually violates at least 2 constitutional rights. This has to be stopped as soon as humanly possible. If you're human, you'll stop this. Woo!
She's running for office, everybody.
The next speaker, Adam Smith, followed by Carrie Ungerman, Paula Miner, and Erica Ferriston.
I don't have much to add to the folks that know so much about this program, but last week Steve brought up during the Q1 homelessness report, he asked, how many of these people are being shipped in here? And it made me think today about how many of the people that are creating these reports, the people in the valley, the people on the west side, where are they coming from? How long have they been here? Which communities are shipping them in? Like Mark Smith says that this program is working. Of course, Horace, all Israelis are white. Frank over there says the program's working. The program, I guess, is working because we all know that for 400 plus years, this country has relied on fear and has relied on white communities being policed by proxy, being deputized, whether they're actual deputized or not, acting as agents of the state to make sure that those that are defined as other are targeted for surveillance and violence, and make sure their bodies are controlled, whether that's caging, whether that's death. All of the audits that you've had of this program show the same outcomes. You need to shut this program down, Mr. Bonner. You got to figure out how to shut this fucking program down.
So many of the previous speakers today have spoken with such passion. Chanel, especially just before, talking from a personal point of view. I happen to live in the part of town where most of these reports were made. I live in the Valley, in Studio City, and I'm not surprised about that, but I'll talk about that during the next comments. I was struck today, when you asked Mr. Bonner about, why a person is being classified, or that may have been in the report, that there needs to be more detail as to why that's happening in the context. And And know that I'm saying all of this thinking the program should be shut down. Also, I was also struck by thinking about that this program was started during a 9/11. I remember when more civil liberties were being taken away in the name of safety, and a lot of people were okay with that. And then the Patriot Act and all these other things kept getting passed. But we saw that a lot of people were being hurt. Particularly, people were going after Muslim people or whoever looked like they were Muslim. So sometimes Pakistani people, a Sikh, all sorts of people were getting beat up and sometimes killed just for what they looked like. Let's see. And then someone else talked about the social media. That is a lot of times in these past mass killings that have been perpetrated by white men, most often, a lot of times they were on social media with lots of clues, letting people, anyone who was following them, letting them know what would happen. And I know everyone's been speaking to the Israelis today, so there are a lot of white Israelis and black and brown living in Israel and living here.
Hi, thank you for your attention and hopefully listening to all of these comments. In 1930s communist Russia, Stalin had eyes painted all over the country to let the people know they were being watched. This was a part of his mutual surveillance program where neighbor was to report neighbor. Friend was to report friend, and family to turn in family to the secret police. SARS is just a modern version of this Stalinist tactic. And instead of keeping society safe, it suppresses freedom, encourages suspicion, promotes degradation, humiliation, and violence. I live in Brentwood. If you don't know, it's a predominantly white area on the west side. And I am seeing the effects of SARS resulting in ginning up fear in this community against other communities. I'm seeing it putting a wedge between our neighborhood and other neighborhoods. And I'm seeing it normalizing racial profiling. So if the intent of SARS is to divide communities, it is a success. If it is to safeguard communities, it is a failure. Shut it down.
A lot of people have talked about SARS today, and it is very emotional. The information that we've received from the public and from the OIG is that SARS has not identified, rarely, any potentially terrorist activities or any terror activities. What it does is divide the community. LAPD urges citizens in community groups, neighborhood councils, and general publicity to report on people they think look suspicious, while those people are walking or jogging or taking photographs, taking notes, using a video camera, using a binocular, are being different in your neighborhood. The Inspector General's report shows that 84% of the SAR reports that they looked at came from the See Something, Say Something informant program. Basically, that is promoted by LAPD, and it shows that the results of those reports are filed mostly in majority white neighborhoods like the West Valley, the West and Valley bureaus, and the black people are disproportionately reported in those reports. About 22%, even though LA's black population is 9.5%, and even lower in the areas doing the most of the reporting, which is the West Side and Valley. LAPD encourages this type of paranoia, which is also demonstrated by the number of white citizens who call police on black people engaging in everyday activities but are perceived to not belong in a so-called white environment. So Black Lives Matter recognize that, again, these programs are part of LAPD's practice of racial profiling, demeaning, demonizing, and criminalizing its black community.
The next three speakers, Craig, I'm sorry, I can't read the first name, Roberts, Craig Roberts, Mariela Saba, and Nick Napolitano.
Craig Roberts, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and the Los Angeles Community Action Network. I don't want to be repetitive or negative, so I'm going to make a suggestion on how you can improve these programs, SARS and the iWatch program, that shut the motherfuckers down. You can shut them down and abolish them and then destroy all data, whether digital, analog, connected with these programs, which is passed through your hands immediately. So that people like Michael Lismore or Steve's puppet, Dickum Teeth Bank, and the rest of these clowns don't have access to this information so that they can conduct surveillance and military-style anti-terrorist operations against the people of this city. The people in this city don't need to be further divided by racial paranoia, fear-mongering, suspicious activities, racial profiling, ethnic profiling. We've had enough of all that. You guys need to get out of the business of aiding and weaponizing data for the purposes of helping white supremacy. You need to end that right now and save your souls, because remember, the God most of you claim to believe in is going to sit in judgment one day for you, and you're going to get on a rocket sled to hell. I'm out.
No white man has, especially in a blood-tainted suit, has any place trying to guess where people come from. Only we define our roots. I am from Palestine. I am from Mexico. I am queer. I am free. I am hummingbird. I am my ancestors. I am my seeds. I am all my relations. I am black. I am trans. I am young. I am the other. I am Ezell Ford. I am Sandra Bland. I am Waukesha Wilson. I am Jesse Romero. I am Carnell Snell Jr. I am Trayvon Martin. I am Susie Peña. I am Roxana. I am Joanna. I am my mother, my sister, my brother. I am Pedro Echeverria. And in the eyes of the police state, I am suspect. So we reject your racist doctrine, your shoot to kill politics, your police commission stamp of approval on every murder. We reject your I Watch, see something, say something scheme. This racist hotline propaganda program to encourage, to see someone black in the West Side and report them, to see someone brown in the neighborhoods you're helping gentrify and report them. Adding more black and brown, migrant, trans, femme people on your list of targets. We are powerful. We are sacred. We reject suspicious activity reports. I watch.
Next speaker, please. Got it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm what's called a targeted individual from gang stalking, and you know about gang stalking, and all you know about gang stalking too. I'm a TI, and I never had an opportunity to see the face of evil as it is in you. I've been on the program for 10 years, and it starts out with a SAR, a simple SAR, and then it goes into the fusion center, and then they relay it to the FBI, Department of Justice, Medical Research, Department of Defense, and that's where you go. This is 10 years later. You see it? 10 years. They use COINTELPRO tactics, FBI, and the FBI hold on to the record for 30 years. And a lot of people have been driven to suicide as a result of your harassment, psyops, breaking and entering, and even in the mental experimentation that they do too. MK Ultra continues, COINTELPRO continues, and I see evil in all of you. You are evil. Your whole program is evil, and I hope you all rot in hell.
Next speaker.
The next three speakers, Clint Blakely, followed by Harry Gilbert and Matteo Nagasi.
All right, so thankfully a lot's already been said about the just speaking the truth about what's really going on with the SAR program. Thankfully, that's already been done because I don't need to do it because it takes about 2 seconds to debunk all this pseudoscience going on up here. So what I really want to speak to is week after week we hear Commissioner Bonner asking really clear, concise questions to the subcommittee here, to the rest of the commission. Very, very simple questions. Is this program working, for example? Can we look at the policy rather than the procedure? And you guys take hours to just come up with rambling answers, skirting away from the questions. It's really not that hard. This program is not working. All it is doing is creating a culture of suspicion and fear-mongering in mostly white communities against marginalized folks. We need to shut it down. The real counterterrorism operation is us, as we try to stop the terrorism that is being committed by the Los Angeles Police Department. Shut this program down.
Shut it down.
I'm with Stop LAPD Spying, and I'm also a doctoral student in Cinema and Media Studies at University of Southern California. I don't mention this because I think it affords me any sort of authority, fuck academia, but because I can see that you all overvalue the sheen of expertise. I want to talk a little bit about seeing. In film theory, we talk about the gaze and how it is not a freely directed sense, but is structured by and suffused with power, often hegemonic power, and reproducing that power. That is to say, when people and objects call our attention of the gaze, and that's informed by history. If you'll allow me to work by analogy, by way of mapping the asymmetrical power relations in this space, certain bodies, gestures, objects, and sounds appear to you as disruptive, and you name them as such, whereas the very action of calling something a disruption is never named itself as a disruption by accountability by the people. That is, quote unquote, see something, say something in action. What is seen and said is coded by race, sex, class, and gender. As such, to wonder whether a program should diversify its others to include more categories is besides the point. A wholesale change is needed. End SARs. All power to the people. And I just want to add, Israel is a pretty apt geography to bring into this conversation. Like the United States, Israel is a settler, colonial, occupying power that has predicated its recognition and legitimacy and sovereignty upon the historic and ongoing erasure and annihilation of those deemed racial, ethnic, national, and religious others. Indeed, this has even been at the expense of Jews who are non-white and non-European. Israel is not a Jewish state. It is a white supremacist and colonial state. This is all to say, if SARs are a matter of seeing something and saying something, our seeing is situated and historical. A suggestion that an Israeli might not ever be read as Arab speaks to a racist visual history that the U.S. shares and colludes in. It also indicates how what you call an attention-to-only behavior nonetheless concentrates by very just basic bureaucratic processes.
Next speaker, please.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be as eloquent as everyone else, but here we go. SARS. Let me tell you about suspicious activity. Suspicious activity is what got Grishario Mack killed. Suspicious activity is what got Brian Rodriguez killed in front of his family, as they told you he had mental episodes. Suspicious activity found Eric Rivera being reported as a 40-year-old man with a gun wandering around the block. In fact, he was a 20-year-old with a neon green water gun. This idea that the department and the city that leads in deaths in this country are trying to somehow be there for public safety, you're the absolute opposite. Why don't you rely on the Times? They're always outing you guys for targeting blacks for crime and targeting Latinos for drugs. They have debunked every program that you have tried to perpetuate along with Stop LAPD Spying. You rode up on Ryan Twyman last week in his carport and you shot him dead and you beat up his girlfriend and put her in jail and his friend. This old trick of turning people against each other, it's as old as racism is in this country. Keep us fighting so that you all can rule. Are you familiar with the Negro Act of 1740? Negro Act of 1740 gave you permission to kill black people. That's what this country's about. I mean, that's the history. And you act like you're perpetuating something that's for public safety. And I'll close with this. There's a saying that the notion that the police are here to provide public safety is the biggest mythical fabrication of the 19th.
Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Adam Rice, followed by Kai Utsumi.
Good morning. There's been a lot said today. To be honest, Steve, it probably would have went a lot quicker if you would have just given us 20 minutes to actually lay out the facts instead of inviting Commander Freight to lay out his bullshit and making us come and do public comment. However, seeing as how we know basically what this police department and our city government cares about is money, not effectiveness, Hamid was correct. In 2012, a U.S. Senate subcommittee investigation concluded that the SARS program was a waste at state and local was a waste of money. At that point, in 2012, it had already cost $1.4 billion just in federal funding, nothing else. Yet the program continued. In the 2013 audit, speaking to racial profiling, 24% of those profiled were black. 59% were other races other than mine. 31% in 2015, 39% other races. 26% Middle Eastern in 2016, 15% black, 37% other races, including Latinos and Asians. Now, but when you hit other races, you always also have to understand that sometimes people don't collect ethnic data. It is ridiculous to allow this program to continue. The SARS program is not only a waste of money. Yet again, can anyone name one conviction to come out of this? That's a shitload of money for nothing to happen. And I would also like to add that Horace Frank is a horrible person to put in charge of this.
Next speaker, please. Next speaker.
Next speaker
Let's
is
speak again during
Kayutsumi.
public comment. Next speaker. Is that it?
You spoke already? Okay, we have no other comment cards on this item.
Okay, we have a motion is to approve the Inspector General's report. I'll move. Second. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Let's go to item number 3, the report of the chief. Chief, good morning, sir.
Thank you. So, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Commissioners, as customary, I will report on significant instances, including officer-involved shootings, as well as events and community engagement and collaboration efforts. First, in this last period, we did have 2 officer-involved shootings, and I'll provide a statement relative to each one. First, occurring on June 5th at approximately 4:50 in the afternoon in the Hollenbeck area of Los Angeles at the 150 block North Myers Street in Los Angeles. It involved an individual later identified as Mr. Jose Abel Aribi, and Hollenbeck gang enforcement uniform officers observed a vehicle with tinted windows in violation of a vehicle code section. They conducted a traffic stop for that violation. The front passenger was later identified as Mr. Aribi. He exited and fled on foot, according to the officer's account. A foot pursuit ensued.
Go ahead. You can leave the room.
Foot pursuit ensued, during which Mr. Aribi allegedly threw a semi-automatic handgun over a large storage container. That handgun landed on the ground on the opposite side of the container. Ignoring the verbal commands of the officers, Mr. Aribi retrieved what we believe to be a second handgun, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. He threw that handgun over the fence, and where it was later recovered. The discarding of the handgun and the incident were both captured on body-worn video. Mr. Aribi had a gunshot wound to his left rear thigh. He continued to ignore verbal commands, resulting in a taser deployment and activation. He was taken into custody and transported by rescue ambulance to a nearby hospital, where he was treated for a through-and-through gunshot wound to his leg. There were no officers injured in this incident. A .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun with a loaded magazine was recovered, along with a second .45 caliber semi-automatic magazine from a parking lot south of 150 North Myers Street. Force Investigation Division officers and detectives responded, as did the Officer Inspector General and the District Attorney's rollout team, officer-involved shooting rollout team. The second incident occurred in northeast area and occurred on June 6th at approximately 12:20 in the afternoon at the 3800 block of Edenhurst Avenue in Los Angeles. It involved an individual that has not been identified beyond, we're currently listing as a John Doe. He's a male Hispanic, and Northeast uniform officers responded to a radio call of a man armed with a box cutter causing a disturbance. The officers located the suspect, the individual who was standing on a sidewalk of the 3800 block of Edenhurst Street. The officers gave commands to the individual, and he complied by raising his hands and facing away from the officers. The officers continued to give commands to the suspect, to the individual in Spanish, for him to go down to his knees. At approximately 30 to 40 seconds later, suspect reached into his rear waistband and removed a box cutter type knife and dropped it. He then picked the knife up and charged at the officers, resulting in a beanbag deployment as well as an officer-involved shooting. Suspect was struck by both the less lethal beanbag round as well as the lethal rounds from the firearm, and immediately dropped to the ground, where he was taken into custody. A rescue ambulance was requested and provided medical treatment. Unfortunately, the suspect did not respond to that treatment and was determined by the rescue ambulance staff to have died. No officers were injured in this event. A box cutter knife was recovered, and witness interviews indicate the individual may have suffered from mental illness. Force Investigation Division detectives responded, assumed investigation, as did the Officer Inspector General and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's officer-involved shooting rollout team. As to events this past week and instances, I want to first congratulate Police Commissioner Sandra Figueroa, as well as Lieutenant Mondo Perez, who were awarded this past Friday at the Hispanic American Police Command Officer Association and Lillet a scholarship and awards gala. I was able to attend a portion of that, and it was my pleasure and honor to recognize both individuals for their leadership and their contributions here to Los Angeles. I also later attended that night the Black Prosecutors Association of Los Angeles, their Al Jenkins Scholarship and Awards Dinner, where they recognized one of the individuals recognized was our own Deputy Chief Regina Scott. Over the course of the weekend, I also met with LA County Sheriff Villanueva. where we've talked recently about beginning a research effort. It appears that at this point that the Sheriff's Department is going to stop their transportation of arrestees, something that has occurred for quite a few years, decades, in which the Sheriff's Department has takes the responsibility under contract with municipalities to transport the arrested individuals for arraignment courts and across this county. Based on demands that the Sheriff's Department is currently faced with for their resources and other aspects of LA County, they have determined that they will no longer be able to continue that service. So we began our initial meeting and discussion relative to that circumstance. We do, as a city, have this, we remain under contract until June of next year, of 2020. And I will come back to this board in the coming months with our plan, if you will, as to what our options are and strategies to deal with this significant change and how the department conducts its day-to-day operations relative to the arrangement for arraignment of arrestees. There is a working group on this of the county criminal justice system, including the public defender's office, the district attorney's office, the sheriff, and us. We will look to the ability of using video arraignment as a matter of arraigning individuals from the local custody arrangements rather than requiring a physical transport. That has been an initiative within LA County for more than a decade that has been fraught with challenges, and we will look to what processes that have improved with data, with new systems, and that would allow us to deal with the challenges of a successful video arraignment process for Los Angeles, more than 100,000 arrestees each year. A number of those arrestees are released on their own recognizance, but many others require transportation to an arraignment court for the proper judicial review of their arrests and circumstances of whether they will remain in custody pending the resolution of their criminal charges or be released on bail of their own recognizance. So again, I will come back and we'll talk further about that, and I would suspect I'll have information for you within the next 90 days. I also had the honor of participating with the LA Pride Parade with Mayor Eric Garcetti and LA Police Chief Ralph Terrazas, where we walked the course. I again want to thank Commissioner Santiago Villa as well as former Commission Vice President Robert Saltzman for attending the event and being a participant in the parade. It's a great day of celebration and in the past 50 years to see such a transition and evolution of policing and how our men and women who attended this in large numbers to voluntarily and enthusiastically participate as parade participants. As proud as Chief to be a member of that group, along with Chief Gramala, who was also there with me, and a number of other people. And moving away from our community events and collaboration and efforts. So one last issue, I did meet with Mayor, the new recently elected Chicago Mayor, Lori Lightfoot. Ms. Lightfoot came to Los Angeles in an effort of a sister city with us. We've worked very closely with Chicago, the city of Chicago, over the last 4 years in sharing our tactics, strategies, and also understanding theirs as in regards to public safety. And I was very honored to host her as a guest and have a conversation to strike up that relationship with her appointment as Chicago, New York, LA. Major cities continue to face our greatest challenge with gun violence, and particularly in Chicago. But here in Los Angeles, we are interested in what gains they make there and their work, and how we can perhaps learn from their strategies as well as them from ours. In regards to my weekly crime snapshot of where we're at, I'm pleased to say that as we come into the summer months, that our trend in seeing a decrease in overall violent crime and property crime and overall Part 1 crime has continued. As of this last Saturday, we have 108 homicide victims versus 117 last year. That's 9 fewer shooting victims, or 9 fewer homicide victims, which is a 15% reduction. We have a 4.6% reduction in violent crime, which is 517 fewer violent crimes. And we have a 7.9% reduction in property crime, which is 3,443 fewer property crimes this year versus last. And for an overall reduction of just over 7% for Part 1 crimes, and over a 2-year period, a reduction of 7.7%. Our challenges remain nearly entirely in the victim shot category and primarily gang-related victims that are shooting victims. This week, I'm happy to report that we have seen an improvement. We have an additional 47 shooting victims this year versus last, which is an improvement of about 10 fewer shooting victims comparison from one year to the next. Over a 2-year period, we still see an overall reduction, but we continue to work in our community outreach and engagement, particularly in the 77th Newton and Southeast areas of the city, where nearly the entire amount of this increase has been experienced. In regards to gang-related crime, we still have an increase of 5.6%. That's 92 additional crimes this year versus last, and of the 47 additional shooting victims, 27 of those are additional shooting victims this year versus last that we've identified as being gang-related. The officer-involved shooting stats, including the last two that I just spoke to, leaves us a total of 12 officer-involved shootings this year versus last. Last year, we had 16. This year, 12, so that's a 25% reduction. We have had 5 fatal officer-involved shootings this year. Last year, that number was 8, and which is a 37% reduction, recognizing the single-digit numbers there. Moving over to traffic, our traffic collisions effectively for overall serious and significant injuries remain flat this year versus last. Our hit and runs, we have seen an increase. This year we've had 118 serious injuries or death related hit and runs versus 105 last year. The largest increase is in the area of serious injuries on those hit and runs. Our motor vehicle versus ped collisions involving serious injury or death are essentially flat, and so is our bicycle-involved serious injuries and death. However, I am encouraged because in both motor vehicle versus ped as well as bicyclist-involved collisions, the overall number of collisions in both categories are down. And this is motor vehicle versus ped. We have more than 100 fewer motor vehicle versus ped collisions this year versus last, which is a 7.7% reduction. And in our bicyclists involved, we have 140 fewer bicyclists involved collisions this year versus last. So those are good numbers, and I must say I believe that the increased efforts by traffic in those commands, particularly as we've marshaled them into a group, I believe is having some of the desired impact on those enforcements. I thank Chief Gramala and Commander Lewis and Chief Chow for their leadership on that. Lastly, as I typically do, we'll report on our personnel strengths. This year to date, we have 10,009 sworn police officers on LAPD's payroll. Our civilian staffing is 2,962. Our reserve officers remain 385 in number, and our cadets at 1,484. And I'm happy to answer any questions or take comments.
Thank you. Questions, anything for the chief? Do we have any public comments on the chief's report?
We have 4 cards, sir.
Okay.
We have Michael Novick, Adam Smith, Paula Miner, and Clint Blakely.
Chief, will you report on the passing of Esmeralda?
Yes. So would you mind if I were to take this comment first and then follow up?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Several weeks now, the chief has reported multiple officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths. I think very quickly we'll be at a point where you can no longer say it's behind the previous year. I'm very concerned about that increase in shootings. There were 4 people shot and killed by law enforcement within about a 24-hour period last week. That's not just the LAPD, but I think that the gains that were made briefly maybe were just a statistical anomaly if we're now catching up to the typical annual record of almost a person a week being shot on average by LAPD. So I'm very concerned that once again he has 2 officer-involved shootings in his report this week, and I think that you should be equally concerned about it. I think you should also insist that the chief incorporate in-custody deaths every week in his reports and accumulate those totals along with the people shot and killed. You have week after week, you have the cases that come up in closed session, and you need to draw conclusions about that as to policy changes that would result in 0 deaths, which the chief has claimed that that's his goal, but we don't see it evidenced in practice.
Chief?
So if yes, let me expand my remarks to include a tragic set of circumstances involving the passing of a police officer this past Sunday. Police Officer 2 Esmeralda Ramirez was an officer assigned to the Pacific area of LAPD. She was hired in 2008, worked very effectively within the organization, and in 2015, her and her partner, she was a driving officer, was involved in a traffic collision where their vehicle was sideswiped. As a result of that traffic collision, she suffered injuries that we have worked in, and she's worked on trying to recover from. This past Monday, a week ago Monday, part of that recovery effort was a surgery procedure, a significant one, and in which, unfortunately, it appears complications arose from the aftermath of that surgery, and she passed away on Sunday. At her bedside was her 3 adult children and other members of the family, as well as members of the organization. I visited her last Tuesday in the immediate aftermath of this tragic circumstance relative to the aftermath of this surgery, and obviously everyone is devastated within the Pacific Command, and as a department we're mourning her passing. We would ask for people's thoughts and support of her family in this need, as well as the men and women of the Pacific area. Services are pending. I would expect that they will take place next week, and that's all I have on this at this moment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Smith?
Chief, I'm sure it's not, I assume it's not policy, but I'm not here to make a complaint, but I just think it's worth pointing out. 2 Thursdays ago, I was part of a press conference at City Hall, out front of City Hall East. And, you know, I'm obviously with my kids a lot, so plenty of people see my kids. So this guy comes by in a suit with what looks to be a dignitary protection pin, pulls out his phone. Well, and like as I turn toward him, I notice that he pulls out his phone and takes a picture of me and my kids. And while I don't mean to say that someone that looks like me is going to be targeted by the LAPD for much, I think it's kind of fucking weird that someone would take a picture of me. And while there's no proof that he was LAPD, when he came, I didn't have a chance to say anything to him, but then I saw him come back and I asked, why the fuck did you take my picture? Why the fuck did you take a picture of my kids? And he just like stared at me hard. Like, why did I dare to speak to him? And I would think that like, if he didn't take my picture or had, I don't know, it just made me think like, why the fuck would an LAPD suit take my kid's picture? They're 3 and 4. Like, I'm a good-looking 39-year-old. Take my picture, but what the fuck are you doing taking pictures of my kids?
We have no other comment cards on the chief's
public
report?
comment, then?
Public comment, we have six cards. We have Michael Novick, Jeffrey Velshad, John Avalos, Adam Smith, Mateo Nagassi, and Lucas Martin.
Okay.
So once again, I will urge the Police Commission to conduct these meetings in the evenings in the community around the city so that people can hear what's going on and be apprised of the policy decisions that you're making and have a chance to comment on them. You heard several people today comment on the fact that it's very difficult for them to come here during the day, during working hours. I'm retired myself, so I try to make it a habit to come here, but a lot of other people don't have that option. I think that, once again, you've been derelict in your duty as a police commission to really offer effective oversight and control of the LAPD. I think that you need to think deeply about the nature of a system that you're upholding and enforcing. And my earlier comments, people look completely puzzled why I refer to, the war in Iraq and to Dick Cheney and the total information system that they tried to impose. But you're talking about policing in the context of the war on terror. And the idea that the LAPD is an anti-terrorist agency. And I think you need to really understand your complicity in that system and why it's inappropriate for a local law enforcement agency, if you think such an agency is necessary, to engage in those kind of practices and that type of activity and what it leads to in the society. So I hope that you take very, very seriously what you heard today from people in Stop LAPD Spying and other community organizations about the nature of the programs that you're putting into effect and the impact, the harm it does to the communities that you claim to be serving.
Jeffrey?
Next speaker.
Hello. All right. Everyone's pretty much gone. I wanted to speak last week, but I guess that got recessed. I had some notes and things. I talked to some officers on the street about 2 weeks ago or so, and they didn't really have that high of a estimation of the influence, control, power, or impact of this organization, the Board of Police Commissioners. I mean, you probably know where you stand within the order of things, but I mean, as far as the people coming here and making efforts to make change, it's kind of hard if you're not in charge of the police department or don't have power, or you're not perceived as having power. That would slow things down. So I consider that as a issue. As far as the jail, I've been in jail. I know the sheriffs do most of that, but you have your facilities, and I thought like the health, just as far as human rights, is that you could feed people healthy food. I don't consider it to be appropriate the way that the people are treated within your jail as well as other jails, besides the obvious safety issues that have been mentioned. Small things are possible for you to do, I would think, like just giving someone salads or things that are not unhealthy. The bids, all of these bids that we have in LA, I go to Santa Monica often, as I mentioned previously. I don't see bids in Santa Monica. People say they have more resources to do things right or just somehow take care of put the proper amount of money into things. I feel the resources exist in LA, but the will does not exist. So, maybe some small changes could be made in that area. I feel you have power as a body to make some small changes more than you do. I think that would be good, as there seems to be a huge distance between the people and you. Maybe the distance could be just somewhat smaller.
John Avalos?
Hi, everybody. When I was younger, I used to go to all the gay bars in West Los Angeles and spend a lot of money. And I stopped going to West Hollywood, for a lot of reasons. Mostly when Pete Wilson went after all the Mexican culture and the Mexican people. All these rich business people said nothing about how their low-income people were being disparaged, their low-income workers. But what I want to say is that I saw the images of the mayor and Michael Moore at the West Hollywood parade on Sunday with all these cheering crowds. And then I was told that the commissioners were there also, but I heard only one. You said only one commissioner was there. Sandra was the only one there with you. So here we have 500, more than 500 black and brown people still trying to get justice. Why were their children killed? Why were these people killed? And your district, the DA doesn't want to file charges, yet these people are dead. So the way I looked at this image of, yay, the gay people cheering you on, mostly the white people in West Hollywood cheering you on. That's like the Jim Crow era when they were hanging all these people and then there was white crowds cheering. That's how I see it. That's my analogy, I guess it is, my parallel. Those people were cheering you. The cops were cheering the mayor and the cops and the commissioners. They were just cheering you on. It looks so beautiful. So that's pretty bad. West Hollywood, I'm very disappointed.
Adam Smith, followed by Mateo Nagasi.
Also think it's always worth bringing up that, especially on a day today, unlike today, I'd like to have gone to the Board of Supervisors. I'd also like to have gone to City Council to talk about the parking ban and the statewide towing law that gets disproportionately enacted against homeless people that are trying to not end up in a tent on the street. Also, I don't know if Melita Corrado's family is still here, but while I think it's good that you let their representative speak first today, I think it's shameful that when you're talking about people being killed by police and having to bring the family into this room, into the police headquarters, surrounded by armed police, they should always be up front in the agenda and not have to sit through everything else. And Melita Corrado's name isn't even on the agenda. I know that Gene Atkins' name is on the agenda, but he didn't pull the trigger. You're going to put the murder on him, which is what our system of justice does, but he didn't pull the trigger that killed her. And the least, out of respect for her family, the least you could do is put her fucking name on the agenda.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about the gay pride parade, but, there's a certain parallel, like John was saying, in white supremacy, because in the gay scene, there's just as much racism as there is in regular society. I don't know why you would think otherwise. So, yeah, they're going to cheer the protectors of their property and of their lives. I rode a scooter down there, and when I found a unrestricted place to park the scooter, I stumbled upon a elementary school that had like 3 buses full of law enforcement and some tactical trucks. And then inside the elementary school, there were, I think, like 12 police cars. And it's just, God, it was just disgusting. This idea that you perpetuate public safety again is bullshit, and I, for one, and I know this is something that I've been thinking about, is having law enforcement banned from Martin Luther King's parades, because he didn't have a relationship with the police. In fact, he was a victim of police violence. And so I think waving at people one day and then possibly shooting at them the next day, law enforcement has no place in the Martin Luther King parade, and I'm going to be leading the fight to get you guys banned, because it's been happening across the country, and I just really think that you have no place there. And again, with the suspicious activity, and Chief, we all know about your suspicious activity when you accepted that $1.2 million payout from the DROP program when you were otherwise not qualified to receive, but it was your colluding with Herb Wesson and the mayor, Gangster Garcetti, that allowed you to
Do we have any other public comments?
We have no other public comment cards. We have one card for closed session. We have Michael Novick for
Mr. Novick,
5A1.
This is on 5A1.
Yeah, 5A1, as Adam Smith pointed out, there were actually 2 victims in that officer-involved shooting. You heard from the lawyer for the Trader Joe's manager who was shot and killed in that incident, and you didn't put her name on the agenda, but you should have. She was a victim of a police shooting. And so I think that you need to be upfront and honest about these details, and you need to draw some lessons from them. You had what I think a lieutenant, a captain, a sergeant, and 2 police officers. So that's 5 more officers involved in that incident. And week after week, you have these cases that come before you, and you deal with them in closed session and reach some conclusion about the individual officers, but you're not dealing effectively with the need for transformation in the department and the culture and the mission of law enforcement, and of the collateral damage that happens to people in the city by having a armed body enforcing laws that are basically unjust. And so I would urge you again to take that responsibility seriously, and to find the death of Miss Corrado certainly out of policy. And I think that your ineffectiveness in transforming this department indicts you along with them, and that if you can't make the changes that are needed, then you should resign your positions and let somebody take over who can. The idea that the police unit is able to put through their transformation of the Board of Rights that they talked about last week, based on the desire people have.
Okay.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 5A. Ready. The Board of Police Commissioners has concluded its work in closed session. We are back in open session. The Executive Director will report out.
As to item 5A1 OIS 046-18, the Commission unanimously adopted the Chief of Police recommendations. Those recommendations were as relates to tactics, tactical debrief, 1 Captain 1, 1 Lieutenant 2, 3 Sergeant 1s, 2 Police Officer 2s. Drawing and exhibiting, in policy, 1 Sergeant 1, 2 Police Officer 2s. Use of lethal force, in policy, 2 Police Officer 2s. And that concludes the report.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn? The commission stands adjourned. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
here for the Filipino Independence Parade, and we're here to celebrate the culture of Filipinos.